Hey friends, tonight we're diving into something you've probably never thought about before, and honestly, you didn't know you needed to. Medieval Europe, early morning, and the strange fact that many towns actually smelled like cinnamon. Not the kind of cinnamon you sprinkle on French toast. This was earthier, smokier, and often accidentally mixed with less pleasant aromas. It wasn't because people were baking pastries, or because medieval Europe was secretly running a cinnamon empire. No, the truth is far more boring, and somehow way more fascinating. So, before we settle into this little olfactory journey through history, do me a favour. Dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket, let your shoulders drop and take a slow, deep breath. Listen to the quiet hum of whatever's in your room. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, but only if you're ready to drift into the most relaxing, uneventful corner of medieval life tonight. Because we're about to walk those damp, cobbled streets at dawn, and discover why the air smelled faintly of spice, ash, and something not quite as lovely. Hey friends, tonight we're stepping back in time to a place you've seen in movies and storybooks, but probably never really thought about in detail. Picture a small medieval town somewhere in Europe. It could be in Flanders, maybe in the German states, or tucked along the riverbanks of France. The air is cool and heavy, the cobblestones damp with dew. Birds are just beginning to stir on the edges of the wooden rooftops, and faint streams of chimney smoke are curling into the morning sky. And then, there it is. That strange, faintly sweet smell. Something like cinnamon, but mixed with wood smoke, wet hay, and, let's be honest, the lingering scent of last night's chamber pots. Welcome to the unglamorous morning of a medieval European town. You might wonder, why cinnamon, after all? Cinnamon in the Middle Ages was rare and expensive. It wasn't lying around in barrels on every street corner. In fact, real cinnamon mostly travelled from Sri Lanka and southern India, along dangerous trade routes that passed through the hands of Arab merchants, Venetian traders, and finally into the kitchens of Europe's wealthiest elites. Most people living in these towns had probably never tasted it. Yet, in the quiet hour before dawn, some streets carried that warm, spicy note in the air. The secret wasn't in the bakeries, although bread ovens certainly added their own scent to the morning mix. The cinnamon smell often came from the fires themselves. Medieval towns burned all kinds of fuel: wood, charcoal, peat, and sometimes bundles of dried herbs, straw, and rushes to get the first flames going. In certain regions, alder, cherry, or applewood was common, and these gave off a soft, sweet fragrance when burned. In market towns where spices were stored in small quantities for trade, the faintest trace of cinnamon or clove could drift into the streets when someone began to cook or boil water over a morning fire. But the more mundane truth is that the smell you might call cinnamon was probably a mix of wood smoke and tannins, mingling with the faint spice residue of medieval life. Towns had an odd rhythm in those hours. Night soil collectors, yes, the ones who emptied chamber pots, had often just finished their rounds before sunrise. Market stalls were being assembled, bakers were already at work, and blacksmiths were just stirring their coals to life. All of these combined into a cocktail of smells that was both earthy and unexpectedly warm. If you were a traveller entering the town gates at dawn, you'd notice it. After days of muddy roads and farm scents, the smell of a town waking up, smoke, bread, leather, maybe a whisper of spice, might feel almost comforting. You'd just moments before. Daily life in these towns moved slowly. Most residents lived in timber-framed houses, 2 or 3 stories high, with upper floors that leaned precariously over the streets. The ground floors often served as workshops or storefronts. A cobbler, a brewer, or a weaver would start his day here, maybe shuffling to the door in heavy woolen socks and a rough linen tunic, yawning as he set a bench or barrel outside to signal that he was open for business. The narrow streets funneled the scents upward, trapping smoke and steam between the close-built houses. That's why a single pot of spiced ale warming on a hearth could make an entire lane smell, just slightly of cinnamon. It wasn't all cosy, of course. Medieval towns were noisy, smelly, and crowded. The illusion of cinnamon sweetness was quickly broken by other, less pleasant realities. Animal pens lined the streets in some quarters, and the runoff from tanneries or butchers often left a lingering sharpness in the air. Yet there was something soothing about the routine. People woke, fires crackled, bells chimed from the parish church, and life went on as it had for centuries. And then there were the markets. By mid-morning, towns would hum with activity. Farmers and traders streamed in from the countryside, bringing carts of vegetables, grain, or the occasional barrel of salted fish. If a spice merchant had come through recently, he might carry tiny packets of cinnamon, clove, or pepper, sealed tightly to preserve their value. The mere act of unpacking them could perfume a corner of the square, leaving just a whisper of fragrance in the damp air. For a brief, fleeting moment, a passerby might think, cinnamon. These smells told stories. They were history you could inhale, a reminder that human life has always been a mix of the mundane and the extraordinary. And as you walk these streets in your mind, a soft boot scuffing on wet stone, you might ask yourself, was the faint sweetness of dawn an accident of daily life, or did medieval townspeople deliberately shape their mornings to smell this way? Inside a medieval home at dawn, the street is waking up behind us, but let's step inside one of these houses now. The door is low, you have to duck, and the first thing you notice is the smell, not unpleasant, but layered. The layered smells of life. A medieval home in the early morning was a living archive of scents. Imagine a single large room with a low ceiling, wooden beams darkened by smoke, and walls that might be wattle and daub, woven branches packed with clay and straw. Here is how the morning greets you. Ash and warm stone. The hearth has been banked overnight, a little mound of coals sleeping under grey powder. The moment someone pokes at it with an iron rod, it releases a soft, warm, mineral scent, like old bricks after rain. Wool and wet earth. Cloaks and bedding are made from wool, which always has a faint animal musk, especially in damp weather. Boots by the door carry the scent of soil and straw from the street. Salted air and meat. If the family is lucky, a ham or dried fish hangs from a beam, infusing the room with a sharp, briny tang. Sweet grain steam. On the fire now, a pot begins to boil. Oats, barley, or rye gruel. A spoonful of honey or a pinch of spice on a feast day transforms the steam into a small celebration. The sound of waking life. It's not silent inside, even though the town is only just beginning to stir. Life here has its own early music. The crackle of kindling catching flame. The rustle of straw bedding as children stir. The soft bleating of a goat in the shed just beyond the wall. The drip of water from a wooden bucket collected last night from the town well. If you listen closely, there's also a rhythm outside, a distu, and church bell, calling the faithful to early prayers, and the occasional clop of hooves as a cart heads to the market square. Light and texture. The light inside is dim. Windows are small and often just covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. The hearth glow paints the walls in flickering orange, highlighting surfaces that are rough and handmade. Woven baskets stacked in corners, wooden bowls smoothed by years of use. Reeds or straw scattered on the floor, both insulation and absorbent mat. It is a world without straight lines or shiny surfaces, soft to the eye and textured to the touch. The small magic of morning. What makes mornings like this remarkable is how slow and intentional they feel. Every action, stirring the fire, grinding grain, leading the animals out, is part of a rhythm that connects the house to the street to the market, and the market to the larger world of trade and ritual. For a brief moment, before the day fills with noise and labour, the home is a sanctuary. The smells of smoke, warm grain, wool, and maybe that trace of cinnamon create a memory that a traveller, or a dreamer, might carry forever. The baker and the first breath of bread. The sun is not yet over the rooftops, but the heart of the town is already alive. The bakery, the baker's world. In medieval Europe, the baker's day began long before anyone else stirred. By the time most townsfolk opened their shutters, the baker had already been awake for hours. The bakery is a small, low building, but stepping inside feels like stepping into the lungs of the town itself, hot, smoky, and breathing. Heat and glow. The bread oven is a squat, dome-shaped furnace, built from brick or stone. Its mouth is black with soot, and the heat radiates outward like a living creature. Air heavy with grain. Flour is everywhere, dusting the wooden tables, clinging to the baker's arms, floating in shafts of orange firelight. It smells like dry fields and summer sun, even in the dead of winter. The quiet company of dough. Rows of dough balls rise slowly under cloth, exhaling a faint swee. Etnus as the yeast does its invisible work. The smell of survival. Bread was life for most townsfolk. Dense rye for the poor, lighter wheat loaves for the lucky. The morning air in a medieval town often carried the perfume of baking bread, mingled with wood smoke and a whisper of spices. Here's why. Imported spices. Even a pinch of cinnamon, nutmeg or clove could make its way into festival loaves. Traders brought these from across the seas, and their warmth drifted out the bakery door like a promise. Burnt edges and charred wood. The first loaves always carried a smoky bite. That scent mingled with the cold morning air, becoming the town's unofficial alarm clock. Sweet relief. For those walking the streets early, market porters, milkmaids, guards, just breathing in that aroma was a comfort. A moment on the threshold. Imagine standing just outside the bakery. You feel the heat spilling into the chill dawn. You see sparks rising from the chimney as the baker slides loaves in and out with a long wooden peel. You hear the soft thud of dough meeting stone, the scratch of a broom sweeping ash. A child runs past, clutching a small coin, sent by her mother to fetch the family's morning bread. She pauses at the door, inhaling deeply. For a moment, the world is warm. The town begins to breathe. As the first loaves emerge, the smell travels down the street, curling around corners, mingling with the scents of straw, damp stone, and the faint sweetness of the apothecary's shop. This is why dawn could smell like cinnamon in a medieval town. One bakery, one pinch of spice, and cold air carrying warmth like a gift. The first loaves are cooling on wooden racks, and the baker's smoke now curls lazily into the pale sky. Beyond the bakery, the market square is beginning its own ritual, an awakening that smells, sounds, and feels like life itself. The market before the crowd. Before the sun fully crests the rooftops, the square is mostly empty, a patchwork of cobblestones slick with dew. Echoes of footsteps. The sound of one pair of boots can travel across the whole space, bouncing off shuttered windows. Damp stone and straw. The air smells of wet rock, old wood, and the faint sweetness of straw laid down for livestock. Soft animal murmurs. Somewhere a donkey brays softly, and a rooster, kept in a coop for sale, crows against the sleepy silence. Then the merchants begin to arrive. The first arrivals, the fishmonger. He's always first, carrying baskets lined with wet leaves. The fish smell sharp and briny, an alien scent in a landlocked town. He sprinkles them with cold water, and their scales catch the dawn light. The farmer's cart. A creak and a rumble announce a cart piled with cabbages, onions, and leeks. The smell is green and earthy, like freshly turned soil. The butcher's boy. He brings cuts wrapped in cloth, the metallic tang of raw meat riding the cold air. He whistles as he hangs the day's first offerings on iron hooks. The scent of commerce. As more stalls open, the air becomes a moving tapestry of smells. Baked bread, carried from the bakery, mingling with the damp freshness of the square. Spices and dried fruit. A rare luxury. A merchant with a small chest of cinnamon and raisins opens it briefly to check his wares. A puff of warm, sweet air escapes. Lantern smoke. A few vendors light small oil lamps against the dimness, adding a faint tang of burnt wick. By now, the smell of cinnamon seems to drift from nowhere in particular, from a baker's loaf, from the spice seller's chest, from the memory of feasts past. The first customers. The square slowly fills with early risers, milkmaids balancing pails, leaving a trail of sour sweet aroma, porters and apprentices, their cloaks damp, buying warm bread to carry under their arms. A friar, pausing to murmur a blessing before accepting a heel of bread as alms. They all pass through the square's shifting perfume, each scent a thread in the invisible tapestry of medieval dawn, bells, brooms, and the full awakening. By the time the sun finally began to climb over the low, slanted roofs of the medieval town, the smell of cinnamon had softened into the familiar perfume of daily life, earthy, smoky, and faintly sweet. The streets, which only an hour ago had been quiet but for the clatter of a lone baker or the lazy hum of a cow's bell, were slowly filling with the sounds of the town, shaking itself awake. A bell tolled from the church tower, 3 slow, hollow chimes that rolled across the rooftops like the sound of a far-off drum. That was the town's way of saying, it's time to begin. Not just for the baker, or the monks, or the sleepy watchmen who leaned against the wooden palisade, but for everyone. Shopkeepers and stall vendors would soon shuffle into the square. The miller's apprentice would trudge in with a flour-smeared tunic, and the old women who sold onions, leeks, and bundles of herbs would hobble along with baskets dangling from their arms. The first task for many was sweeping. Town squares and narrow medieval streets were never clean to begin with, and last night's remnants still clung to the stones. Brooms made of bound twigs scraped across uneven cobbles as sleepy residents pushed away bits of straw, fish bones, and the occasional apple core gnawed down to its seeds. They did not work with urgency. The pace was slow, unhurried, the rhythm of a town where time was measured more by the sun than any clock. As the sweeping continued, the smell of cinnamon mixed with other scents. Freshly cut firewood from a carpenter's shed, warm bread from the bakery, now pulling its second round from the oven, and the damp, mossy air of the river beyond the walls. Somewhere a goat bleated, annoyed perhaps at being milked so early. You can imagine walking through the street barefoot, the stones still cool from the night. I say, tea curls against a doorstep, blinking at the light, while a dog lopes lazily past, pausing to sniff at the straw scattered near the stable. It is a world of textures and whispers, the scuff of leather, shoes, the muted splash of someone emptying a bucket into the gutter, the faint creak of wooden shutters being opened one by one. Then comes the chatter. First a murmur like a brook under ice, and then the slow rise of voices, women exchanging greetings, men debating the weather, children bickering over who gets the last slice of yesterday's honey bread. All of this unfolds under the soft haze of the morning, and yet the aroma of spice still lingers, as if it were a charm to keep the day gentle. And in that half-woken town, under the hush of a warming sun, you might pause and wonder how many lives, across how many centuries, began with the smell of cinnamon on a quiet street like this. The market stirs and the spice road whispers. By the time the morning bell had rung twice more, the market was alive. Its heartbeat was not the sound of shouting or clanging, but a gentle, growing murmur, like the low tide inching back toward the shore. The cinnamon-scented air that had so quietly haunted the streets now found its purpose here, in the square, where the first trade of the day began. The spice sellers were always the earliest to arrive. They carried their goods in tightly wrapped sacks and sealed jars, guarding every grain and fragment as if it were a jewel. Cinnamon sticks, curled like tiny scrolls, were stacked alongside mounds of nutmeg, black pepper, and clove. These traders knew that in medieval Europe, a single bag of spices was as precious as silver and far easier to carry. Their arrival told another story, a story that stretched far beyond the walls of this small town. Those sticks of cinnamon had once been bark on a tree in the far reaches of Ceylon or Sumatra. The nutmeg had travelled across the Banda Sea into the ships of Arab merchants through the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf, then overland by caravan through cities that whispered in languages few in this town could ever imagine. By the time the spices reached these cobblestones, they carried with them the scent of distant oceans, desert winds, and markets that glimmered under foreign suns. The townsfolk, though, didn't think much about this in the moment. They smelled the cinnamon and saw only what it meant for their day: spiced bread for the feast of a saint, mulled wine to warm a winter evening, a sweet-scented soap for the wealthiest merchant's wife. Even the poorest passer-by paused, inhaling, for a whiff of a world they would never see. Around the spice sellers, the rest of the market began to bloom like a slow flower. Fishermen laid out their glistening catch, scales flashing in the morning light. Butchers, with aprons already stained, arranged cuts of meat and salted sausages. Farmers lined up cabbages, leeks, and wrinkled apples. The mingled smells, earth, brine, smoke, and still cinnamon, created a perfume that was both comforting and strange, ancient and immediate. Trade in the medieval town was more than buying and selling. It was storytelling in the language of scent. A spice seller's cinnamon stick could speak of oceans and monsoons, of far-off forests and ships heavy with cargo. And as the square filled with voices, that faint sweetness on the breeze reminded every nose that the world was wider than the horizon of the town's walls. From spice to shadow, when the day turns ordinary, as the sun rose higher, the delicate enchantment of dawn began to dissolve into the rhythms of ordinary life. The streets, once a hushed corridor of cinnamon-scented air, now rang with the clatter of cartwheels, the bark of dogs, and the voices of merchants calling prices. The market square was no longer the sleepy, fragrant sanctuary of early morning. Instead, it became a stage of negotiation, gossip, and occasional dispute. Farmers haggled over onions, wool sellers unfurled their biolts, olts of cloth, and somewhere a blacksmith struck iron with a heavy clang that rippled down the street. The smell of cinnamon still lingered, but now it was competing with frying lard, manure, and the unmistakable dampness of humanity. Medieval towns were rarely silent. By mid-morning the air thickened with the odours of daily living, wood smoke from cooking fires, tanneries preparing hides, and the sour tang of chamber pots emptied into the street. This was the moment when the magic of the morning seemed like a dream someone had already half forgotten. Still, the details of daily life carried their own quiet fascination. Bakers moved loaves from their ovens with long wooden peels, their crusts blistered and golden, filling the air with that most comforting aroma, fresh bread. Children darted through alleys, chasing one another with sticks, sometimes slipping on the wet cobblestones that glistened from recent rains or worse, from less mentionable sources. Old women leaned out of windows to shake cloths or call down to neighbours, while apprentices hauled barrels of ale or buckets of water, grumbling under their breath. Inside the homes, life was measured by light. Those with small windows worked quickly while the sun was still strong, mending clothes, stirring porridge, or scrubbing wooden floors with rough brushes and ash soap. The rich and poor alike had to use the hours wisely, because when the sun began to fall, the town's personality would change again. The spice merchants, meanwhile, had done most of their business by this time. Their cinnamon and nutmeg were already tucked into the baskets of cooks or the locked cupboards of wealthy households. The traders themselves would often slip into the taverns, sipping watered wine and listening for whispers of the next caravan or ship arrival, the lifeblood of their trade. By late morning, the once magical smell of cinnamon became just one note in the symphony of a medieval day, a faint sweet thread weaving through a world of sweat, smoke and toil. It had been a fleeting luxury, a sensory bridge to distant lands, now stubble, allowed by the ordinary. Yet there was always an unspoken question in the air. Would anyone remember the cinnamon tomorrow, or would the scent vanish into the unremarkable churn of daily life, waiting to return only with the next quiet dawn? The evening bell and the return of forgotten scents. As the sun tilted westward, the medieval town began to slow. The frantic pulse of commerce softened into the quieter rhythm of evening rituals. Shopkeepers shuttered windows, the last market stalls packed up their unsold onions and bread, and stray dogs began their familiar circuit of sniffing and scavenging. The town bell, a resonant bronze voice, signalled the approach of twilight. Its slow, measured toll carried across tiled roofs and timbered walls, a reminder that night in a medieval town was not to be taken lightly. After dark, the streets belonged to the shadows, thieves, stray pigs, and the occasional drunk wandering home from the alehouse. As homes prepared for the evening meal, the town's air began to shift once more. Fires were stoked, and a smoky perfume of oak and pine drifted upward. The odours of the day, the sweat, the mud, the pungent runoff of animals, settled into the stones and gutters, but a new layer of scent floated above them. In wealthier homes, kitchens simmered with stews of barley and beans, sometimes flavoured with a cautious pinch of the very spices that had perfumed the dawn. Cinnamon, nutmeg and cloves were never used carelessly. Each pinch was both an extravagance and a statement. Their scent in the evening air was softer now, a comforting murmur instead of the thrilling whisper of morning. Torches and lanterns flickered to life, painting the cobblestones in amber light. The streets emptied quickly, leaving behind only the night watch and the occasional echo of a closing door. Yet if one lingered quietly, it was possible to catch that fleeting note again. Or a curl of cinnamon escaping from a cook's pot or wafting from a spice merchant's locked chest. The town had returned to its shadows, to the ordinary churn of life behind wooden walls, but those who rose before the world each day knew the secret. Tomorrow, when the bellows of the baker's oven stirred and the spice sellers set out their goods, the air would again be thick with the strange, sweet promise of cinnamon. It was a cycle as invisible as the tides, one that carried the forgotten luxuries of faraway lands into the lives of people who, for a brief hour each morning, lived in a world touched by spice. And so the day closed quietly, leaving you to wonder how many ordinary lives were shaped, not by great battles or royal decrees, but by something as small and fleeting as the scent of cinnamon at dawn. Hey there, and welcome back. Tonight we leave the narrow alleys of cinnamon-scented medieval towns behind and step into the cool, echoing heart of a cathedral. Not just any cathedral, but one whispered about in records and travellers' diaries. A building said to hum quietly when the clock struck midnight. A sound so soft and low you could feel it in your chest before you ever heard it with your ears. Before we begin, find a quiet spot, dim your lights, maybe let the low rumble of a fan fill your room, and imagine stone all around you. This is the kind of story that settles in slowly, like incense smoke curling through the rafters of a forgotten chapel. If you wandered through medieval Europe in the late 13th century, you might have stumbled upon the town of Villastone. It wasn't famous for much. No royal palace, no major battle, not even a particularly good harvest festival. What it did have was its cathedral, a surprisingly tall and heavy presence rising out of the flat landscape. Its foundation was older than the town itself, sunk deep into the earth, with limestone walls that glimmered faintly white in the moonlight. The cathedral's official name was St. Aurin's Basilica, after a little-known hermit saint, who supposedly cured headaches and fevers. But locals just called it the Hummer, because, as the oldest monks swore, if you stood inside the nave when the world was asleep, you would hear a long, low hum rolling through the stone. The first recorded mention of the cathedral's hum comes from a monk named Brother Henri, who arrived in Villastone in 1279. His diary was found centuries later in the cathedral's crumbling library, and much of what we know comes from his careful handwriting. He described his first night like this. I came to my bed in the dormitory and thought at first it was a bee in my ear or the river far away. Yet when I rose and stepped into the nave, I felt the sound in my bones. It was not music, not voice, but the church itself speaking in a single note. I lay on the cold floor until Matins, and still it hummed. It wasn't a tune. It didn't rise or fall. It was just a steady vibration, like the cathedral itself was breathing. And strangely enough, it only happened after the final bell at midnight and faded away before the first prayers at dawn. By day, the cathedral was completely ordinary. If you stepped inside while the sun lit up the stained glass, you'd hear the usual echoes of footsteps, a faint drip of water from the stone roof, maybe the scrape of a chair or the distant call of a bell ringer. But nothing unusual. Pilgrims came and went, priests muttered their Latin, but the townspeople were convinced the hum came from the stones themselves. The foundation had been laid on the ruins of a much older Roman site, and some swore that the cathedral rested on hollow vaults or buried aqueducts that sang when the wind passed through. Children were told stories of saints' relics glowing underground, of angelic voices sealed in the walls. Still, there were the boring practical theories too. The masons who had helped repair the cathedral in the early 1300s noticed something odd about its design. The central tower, tall but slightly off balance, acted like a tuning fork. When wind funneled through the town's narrow streets and hit the tower just right, the vibration travelled down into the stone. Nave. Villagers who lived nearby said their bed frames sometimes shook ever so slightly, like someone was walking across the roof at night. The hum had a subtle effect on the town's rhythms. Farmers and millers didn't care much. They rose with the sun and worked with their hands. But the monks and night watchmen swore that the hum could make you drowsy, like the cathedral itself was lulling the faithful to sleep. One guard wrote in 1412, "If I stand by the doors at night and hear the hum, I cannot help but think I am in a cradle. My eyelids grow heavy, and I lean upon my spear. God forgive me, I have dreamed standing up." Not everyone liked it. A few travellers called the sound unnatural and hurried on to the next town. There's even a record of a wandering friar who tried to ban midnight prayers at the cathedral because he believed the hum was a devil's trick. But the town ignored him. By then the hum had become a part of Villastone's identity, something quietly claimed as their own. Life in Villastone itself was slow, ordinary, and predictably uneventful. By the early 1400s, the town had fewer than 3,000 people. Most worked in some form of trade, bakers, coopers, shoemakers and brewers, or in the fields that fed them. The streets were mostly dirt, packed tight with cottages that leaned slightly toward each other, their upper floors nearly touching, and at the end of almost every road, you could see the top of the cathedral peeking over the rooftops. The hum wasn't just a curiosity, it became a timekeeper for the town. Those who stayed up late would pause whatever they were doing, tending a late-night fire, finishing a cask of ale, or sweeping the workshop, and listen for the faint sound to roll through. In a world with few clocks, a cathedral that whispered at midnight was a comfort, a natural signal that the day was truly over. But here's where it gets stranger. In winter of 1437, the hum stopped. No one could explain it at first. The monks noticed it immediately. One even went around to other monks' cots, shaking them awake to confirm he wasn't imagining the silence. The cathedral stood heavy and cold, moonlight spilling across the flagstones, and yet nothing. No vibration, no sound, just emptiness. At first, the town panicked. There are entries in the council records calling it a bad omen. Merchants refused to open their stalls the next morning. A few whispered that the cathedral was dying. When days turned into weeks without the hum, Villastone started holding small evening processions, walking around the cathedral with candles as though they could coax the sound back out of the stone. And then, one night in February, it returned, stronger than ever. What caused this interruption, and why did it return with such a powerful resonance? That is where our story begins to turn, and where the mystery of the humming cathedral starts to draw in strangers from far beyond Villastone's quiet streets. The winter of 1437-38 was one of the coldest Villastone had ever known. Ice clung to the edges of the cathedral's roof, and snow buried the streets so deeply that the town's wooden gates froze shut for 3 days straight. It was during this bleak stretch that a stranger arrived, a man who would change the way Villastone understood its own cathedral. His name was Matteo di Bronzini, though he preferred to simply be called Maestro Matteo. He was an architect from Lombardy, a thin man with a sharp nose and a long wool coat lined with fur. He travelled with a mule, a sack of tools, and an expression that made him look perpetually annoyed with the weather. The townsfolk first noticed him because he was standing outside the cathedral at midnight, his bare hand pressed against the icy wall. Snow blew around him, and frost glittered in it. S-beard. When the hum began, Matteo closed his eyes. Witnesses said he stayed there for a full hour, listening, touching the stone as if it were a living thing. By the next morning, Matteo had introduced himself to the abbot of St. Aurine's Basilica and requested permission to examine the cathedral. He claimed he had heard rumours of the singing church for years and had finally travelled north to study it. At first, the abbot hesitated. Outsiders had come before, usually to gawk or to accuse the cathedral of harbouring demons. But Matteo spoke like a man who understood stone. He had repaired bell towers in Florence, measured the wind along the canals of Venice, and studied the domes of Milan. Matteo spent his days wandering the cathedral like a ghost. He carried no candles. Instead, he relied on the light of the winter sun through the stained glass. He tapped walls with his knuckles, muttered in Italian, and sometimes lay flat on the floor to feel the vibrations better. Children followed him like ducklings until their parents dragged them away. On the fourth night he climbed the bell tower. The ladder was slick with ice and the air howled around him. Up there he discovered something the townspeople had always ignored, a gap in the stonework that acted like a windpipe. When the wind struck from the north at just the right angle, it sent a tremor down the entire frame of the tower, like plucking the string of a colossal harp. Matteo returned to the abbot with a mixture of excitement and dread. He explained in a flurry of accented French that the cathedral was an accidental instrument. The masons who built it in the 1200s had left the tower ever so slightly crooked and filled its lower levels with vaults that amplified the vibration. The hum wasn't a miracle or a curse, it was physics. But the abbot frowned. Villestone didn't want physics. They wanted wonder. To strip the hum of mystery felt like taking the soul from the cathedral. So the abbot asked Matteo to keep his findings quiet for now. The town learned of his work anyway, because Matteo decided to test the cathedral. On a frigid night in early March, he climbed the tower with 3 assistants and hung weighted ropes in the rafters. He had calculated that by adding a counterbalance and tuning the tension, he could make the cathedral hum on command. The experiment nearly killed him. At midnight, with the townsfolk huddled in their cottages, a roaring hum rolled through Villestone, so deep and loud that it rattled windows. Dogs howled, snow fell from rooftops, and then with a sickening crack, one of the ropes snapped. Matteo's assistant nearly tumbled into the nave, saved only by a desperate grab at the bell-frame. The town awoke in chaos. Some swore the cathedral was angry at being tampered with. Others whispered that Matteo had awakened a sleeping spirit. The hum that night lasted nearly 10 minutes before fading, and for weeks afterward, people claimed they could feel a faint vibration in the soles of their feet whenever they entered the nave. During this time, Matteo became a kind of reluctant celebrity. Children nicknamed him the Stone Whisperer. He insisted he wasn't performing magic, he was studying resonance. He even attempted to draw diagrams for the town council, showing how the cathedral functioned like an enormous lute, its central tower a fingerboard, its vaults the echoing body of the instrument. And yet, he couldn't explain everything. One night in April, the hum began without any wind. The air was still, the moon bright, the town silent. Matteo, awake in his rented room, felt his chest vibrate. He hurried to the cathedral, threw open the doors, and saw candles trembling in their holders. The hum rolled for nearly an hour. If this was just wind, he reasoned, what force was playing the cathedral tonight? By now, Villestone's citizens had divided into 2 camps. Some sided with Matteo and believed the hum was a marvel of construction and air. Hers clung to the older, stranger idea that St. Aurine's Basilica was alive in some subtle way, responding to the seasons, the prayers, or the unspoken moods of the town. For Matteo, the experience became an obsession. He wrote letters to colleagues in Italy describing the cathedral as a living stone harp. He began sketching plans for how other cathedrals could be built to sing on purpose, but he also admitted in private, "There are nights I fear the stone knows I am listening, and that it hums not to please me, but to remind me that I do not understand." The hum would continue for years, sometimes vanishing for months at a time, sometimes roaring loud enough to wake the dead. But after Matteo, Villestone never thought of it the same way again. Their cathedral was no longer just a church, it was a guardian, a musician, a puzzle that no one fully solved. And if you were to visit the ruins of St. Aurine's Basilica today, if you could find Villestone at all, since the town faded into obscurity after the 1700s, you might find yourself there at midnight, in the cold, listening, and maybe, just maybe, you would feel that faint vibration in your bones, the hum of a stone that remembers. The spring of 1438 had been unusually bright in Villestone. The snow melted early, the river ran high with ice-cold water, and the townsfolk felt a restless energy in their bones. But with the spring came whispers, rumours that the cathedral was preparing for something. Matteo de Bronzini, now almost part of the town himself, had been keeping meticulous records of the hums. He had mapped the patterns of wind, temperature and timing. He had drawn diagrams of airflow through the bell tower and measurements of how the vibrations carried through the nave and crypt, and yet there were nights when the cathedral sang for no reason at all. "It is as if the cathedral is alive," he confided in the abbot one morning, "and it chooses its own hours to speak." The abbot only crossed himself. The warning. One evening in late April, a storm began to gather on the horizon. Black clouds rolled in from Thiers. He north, and the wind carried a bitter cold that felt more like February than spring. Matteo felt it before he saw it, his teeth vibrating faintly, his fingertips tingling against the stone of the cloister. By dusk, the entire town could feel it, a low, steady hum, softer than usual, like the cathedral was inhaling. Mothers pulled their children indoors. Dogs whined and dug at doorways. A few brave men climbed to the walls and looked out at the fields, where the tall grass bent under a wind that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The abbot rang the bell at vespers and prayed aloud for Saint Aurine to protect them. The singing, at midnight, it began. The hum became a roar, windows shook in their frames, snowmelt dripped from the eaves, and somewhere deep in the cathedral, a bass note seemed to vibrate the very air. People woke from their beds thinking the earth itself was moving. Then something extraordinary happened. The hum turned to music. It was not a tune anyone could recognize, but a strange, harmonic wailing, like a choir of voices trapped in stone. The bell tower shivered, the nave pulsed, and the stained glass windows seemed to flicker as though the sound itself was light. Matteo ran into the square in his nightshirt, face upturned to the cathedral. He was laughing and shouting in Italian, though no one could hear him over the sound. Townsfolk opened their shutters and stared, some weeping, some crossing themselves, others holding hands as if the world might end. The sound rose and fell like breathing, and with it came something almost physical. People claimed they could feel their hearts sinking to the rhythm. Candles danced in their sconces, though there was no wind inside. The collapse, and then, with a sound like thunder splitting wood, part of the bell tower cracked. Stone fell into the square, sending up clouds of dust, but the hum did not stop, if it was. Anything, the cathedral seemed to sing louder, as if it were trying to release the note trapped inside it for centuries. Matteo, standing at the base of the tower, realized too late that he had caused this. His experiments, his weighted ropes, his constant adjustments had awakened the cathedral fully, and now it was devouring itself in song. The music reached a crescendo, a note so high and sharp it felt like glass against the ears. Then, in an instant, silence.
Snow began to fall. Aftermath, when morning came, the townsfolk crept into the square. Half the bell tower lay in rubble, but the main body of the cathedral still stood, shrouded in an eerie calm. The abbot said it was a miracle that no one had died, though some swore they had seen shadows moving along the walls in the night. As if something had escaped, Matteo left Velostoni soon after. He traveled south, broken and silent, his journals filled with sketches and notes he no longer wished to read. He would later write, in a letter never sent, "The cathedral sang because I begged it to. But some songs are meant only for God, and now I fear I have heard one." The cathedral never hummed the same way again. Centuries later, when Villastone was long abandoned and its cathedral in ruin, travelers claimed that if you stood among the broken stones on a cold, still night, you could hear the last note of that song, faint and trembling, as if the stone itself was still remembering. Long after the manor stopped breathing, and the cathedral stopped singing, a pattern began to emerge. Travelers, scholars, and the rare wanderers who stumbled upon the trembling places of the world would leave with the same uneasy feeling, that sound pure, unshaped, unclaimed by any voice was alive. A monk who visited the ruins of the cathedral swore he felt the same low hum in the stone walls that he had once felt in a coastal monastery, where the sea itself seemed to whisper secrets. A woman whose family had fled the manor decades before said she still sometimes woke to the sound of breathing under her floorboards, though she lived 100 miles away. These places, disconnected by land and by time, shared a pulse, a resonance, a hidden language of vibration that seemed to drift through centuries, waiting for anyone to listen. And somewhere, in a cobbled town far from both the manor and the cathedral, a clockmaker wound a gear too tightly and wondered why, at night, the ticking seemed to echo not in the room, but in his own bones. You arrive, in your imagination, at a town that doesn't exist on any modern map, a town that, if you listen carefully enough, you can almost hear before you see. It is a sound like the faint clicking of teeth, or the steady drip of rain on a metal roof. Tick, tick, tick. The sound grows louder as you wander its narrow. The streets, where the lanterns hang crooked and the cobblestones are smooth from centuries of footsteps. There are houses here, yes, but they all seem to lean slightly inward, as though listening to something. None of the windows are quite level. The doors do not quite match their frames. And yet, the most notable thing is not what you see, but what you hear, a ceaseless chorus of ticking dot in the 17th century. This place had a name, Weisenfeld, a small market town nestled between two rivers in what is now southern Germany. It was not important, not wealthy, not particularly beautiful. Its only claim to fame, or perhaps infamy, was its obsession with timekeeping. The arrival of Master Kappel. The story begins with a man named Johann Kappel, a clockmaker from UMU who arrived in Weisenfeld in the spring of 1672. He was a quiet man already in his early 50s, with thinning hair and spectacles that left round impressions on the bridge of his nose. He had built clocks all his life, church tower clocks, ornate table clocks, even small pocket watches for noblemen who rarely paid him on time. But Kappel was not merely a craftsman. He was an obsessive. He had come to Weisenfeld for a single reason. The town council had offered him an extraordinary commission. The mayor and the burgomasters wanted a great clock, a masterpiece that would outshine the famed astronomical clock in Prague or the cathedral clock in Strasbourg. This clock would not merely tell the hour, they said. It would mark the rhythm of life. It would chime not only for hours, but for the seasons, the phases of the moon, the tides of the nearby river, and the feast days of saints long forgotten. They wanted a clock that could almost think. And so Master Kappel agreed. He set up shop in a crooked house on the town square, where he lived above a small workshop that always smelled of oil, brass filings, and pine shavings. Day and night, he worked with his apprentices, building gears, hammers, and weights. The obsession with precision. The townsfolk at first adored him. He was polite, though rarely smiling, and he always tipped his hat to the bakers and the fishwives when he passed. But slowly, they began to notice changes. He stopped attending church on Sundays, saying he was measuring the sound of the bells. For the clock's acoustics, he spent hours walking the streets at dawn, listening to the echo of his own footsteps, muttering about the town's natural rhythm. He had grown obsessed with synchronization. Every small clock in his workshop had to beat in perfect harmony with the next. If one ran a fraction of a second too fast, he would dismantle it entirely. He began to collect unusual sounds, the creak of the old windmill, the dripping of the public fountain, even the heartbeat of a calf he had once pressed his ear against. The town began to notice something else as well, the sound of ticking, spreading. It started with the clocks in his workshop. Then, the chimes from the old bell tower seemed to echo in unusual ways, as though being mirrored. Soon, townspeople swore they could hear faint ticking in their walls, their floors, even in their own beds at night. The mayor laughed it off, saying that was simply the sound of progress. But children grew afraid to sleep, and merchants complained, with headaches and strange dreams. Still, Master Kappel worked. He worked until his fingernails were black with oil and his hands shook. He worked until his apprentices left, saying they could no longer bear the sound of gears grinding in their dreams. The great clock awakens. By the autumn of 1675, the great clock was ready. It was a magnificent thing, a towering structure of brass, iron, and wood, placed in the central square. It had 3 faces, each adorned with symbols of the sun, moon, and stars. It had a bell carillon that could play hymns, and a series of automatas, more carved figures that would emerge at different hours, a saint blessing the town, a farmer plowing, a skeleton ringing a funeral bell. The entire town gathered for its unveiling. The mayor gave a speech. The church bells rang, and Master Kappel, pale and trembling, pulled the lever to start the mechanism. At first, it was glorious. The gears turned, the hammers struck, the figures danced, the bells sang their perfect tune, and the townsfolk cheered. But then, something strange happened. The clock did not stop, even when the bells were silent. You could still hear the ticking, louder and louder, as though the sound were multiplying, bouncing off the stones of the square, seeping into the walls of every house. By nightfall, the entire town pulsed with that rhythm. Talk, talk, talk. Children wept, dogs howled, and Master Kappel, he simply smiled, whispering at last, "The town is in time," but the clock would not be stopped. When the mayor asked Kappel to quiet it for the night, he shook his head. He said that if it stopped, the town would fall out of rhythm and terrible things would happen. No one understood what he meant. But that night, every single person in Weisenfeld heard the ticking in their dreams, and in the morning the first townsman was found dead, his face frozen in a peaceful smile, as though he had simply fallen asleep to the rhythm of the clock. And so begins the curse of the clockmaker of Weisenfeld. What was it that Kappel had? Built a clock that kept time, or a clock that consumed it? The first death in Weisenfeld was dismissed as coincidence. The victim, Marcus Wallner, was an elderly cooper who often drank himself into a stupor. The mayor announced that he had likely passed away in his sleep. A tragedy, yes, but not a mystery. Yet the second death came the following night. This time it was Anna Kloster, a young woman of 22 who worked at the bakery. She was found sitting upright in her bed, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, her body stiff and cold. The physician claimed her heart had simply stopped. And then came the third, the spreading dread. By the end of the week, 5 more townspeople were dead. All had died in their sleep, each with the same faint smile on their lips. And still, every night, The great clock ticked, louder and louder, until it was all anyone could hear. Merchants swore that their scales swung in rhythm with it. The river seemed to lap against its banks in time with the clock's pendulum. Even the hearts of the living felt as if they were beating to its rhythm. Some began to whisper that the clock was feeding on them. The townsfolk turned on Master Capel, demanding that he destroy the clock, but the old man refused. His face was gaunt, his eyes ringed with shadows, but his voice was firm. It is not the clock that kills you, it is your resistance to it. Submit to the rhythm, and you will live forever in perfect time. No one knew what he meant by now. Few slept well. Dreams were full of gears grinding, hands spinning, and eyes watching from the dark. Some claimed that, in their dreams, they could see the great clock moving when it should not, its figures turning their heads to look at them. The child who heard too much. Then came the night of the 8th death, and the first survivor with a storied boy named Jacob, only 10 years old, claimed he had been awake when his mother died beside him. He said that he had heard whispers in the ticking, a voice calling softly, "Hush, hush, sleep, be still forever." He said he saw his mother's chest rise and fall slower and slower, until it stopped completely. When the mayor asked the boy why he hadn't succumbed as well, the child simply said, "I held my breath," and counted. From that night on, no one slept willingly. Desperation in Weissenfeld. The mayor ordered the great clock dismantled, but the townsfolk discovered that its mechanism could not be stopped when they tried to remove the weights. The chains resisted as though held by some invisible force. When they tried to break the gears with hammers, the metal would not dent. Even the bell tower had begun to chime without being struck, tolling on its own in eerie harmony. With the great clock, it was as if the entire town had been wound into the same mechanism, and then people began to vanish. The disappearance of Master Capel on the 10th night. The mayor and 3 of the town guards went to confront Master Capel. They found his workshop empty. The tools were still there. The small clocks lined the shelves, ticking perfectly in sync. But the bed was cold, and Capel himself was gone. Yet the great clock kept ticking, and the townsfolk swore they now saw a figure in the clock's upper window at night, a thin man with round spectacles, watching them. Some said it was Master Capel, others said it was something else entirely, the clock itself, wearing his face. The final nights over the next month. The town of Weissenfeld became a place of hushed dread. Families boarded up their windows, hoping to block out the ticking. Church services were held at all hours, with priests chanting to drown the sound. Children were sent away, though few dared travel the roads at night. But the clock, it always followed. Some survivors claimed the ticking moved with them, that no matter how far they went, they could still hear it in the distance, like a heartbeat that would not fade. One by one, the last of Weissenfeld's citizens either died, vanished, or fled. By the spring of 1676, the town was silent except for the great clock, still marking time for no one. The fate of Weissenfeld rovers in the 18th century sometimes spoke of a ghost town in the woods, where the walls leaned inward and a strange ticking could be heard on the wind. By the 19th century, Weissenfeld had vanished from maps entirely. Some say that on certain cold nights, if you stand by the river and listen carefully, you can still hear it. Tick, tick, tick. The Weissenfeld is long gone. Its houses rotted. Its streets were swallowed by the forest. Even the church bell tower, once proud, has collapsed into ivy and moss. But the great clock remains hidden in the trees. Its dark timbers have warped with centuries of rain and frost, yet the clock's face is untouched, white as bone, and its hands still move. No bird nests in its eaves. No moss clings to its gears. Time does not erode the work of Master Capel. The first modern sightings in 1892. A team of railway surveyors reported hearing a distant ticking while mapping the woods near the old river. Route A followed the sound and stumbled upon the ruins of the town. They claimed that the great clock still stood, its pendulum swinging slowly, though no one had wound it in over 200 years. One surveyor, Franz Richter, stayed behind to sketch the clock. His companions left him for only half an hour. When they returned, Franz was gone, his sketchbook lying open in the mud. The drawing showed the clock's upper window, with a gaunt figure in spectacles staring down at him. Urban legends and disappearances through the 20th century. Weissenfeld became a local legend in Bavaria. Hikers and thrill-seekers would sometimes venture into the forest in search of the ghost clock. Many returned with unsettling stories. A group of students, 1964, claimed that the ticking got inside their heads, matching their own heartbeats, until one of them fainted. A hiker, 1977, insisted that when he touched the clock's door, he heard whispers in the wood, like hundreds of tiny voices counting. A missing person case, 1993, involved a photographer who vanished while attempting to capture the clock at night. His camera was later found dangling from a branch, the last frame showing blurred hands reaching out of the clock face. The professor's experiment in 2006, a folklore professor named Dr. Annelies Brandt led a research team to Weissenfeld, equipped With audio recorders and cameras, they plan to document the great clock as part of a study on time-related legends. What they found has never been officially published, but a leaked field diary paints a chilling picture. Night 1, the ticking, was audible from 300 meters away. Cameras captured minor fluctuations in the second hand, which would stutter and then leap forward. Night 2, team members reported insomnia and vivid dreams of gears turning endlessly. Audio captured a low murmuring synchronized with the ticking. Night 3, one student vanished from a tent. The cameras showed only blurry frames of movement, and the clock's pendulum appeared to be swinging faster. The remaining team abandoned the site at dawn. Dr. Brandt refused to speak publicly about the expedition. She resigned from the university within the year and died in her sleep in 2011. A faint smile on her lips. The clock's influence in the modern age. Paranormal researchers now claim that the great clock has a field of influence. Electronics malfunction. Nearby, watches and phones desynchronize. Some theorize that the clock is not merely a mechanical device but a time anchor, trapping any living thing that lingers too long within its radius. Others suggest it is a parasite, feeding on human lifespans to keep itself running. There are rumors unconfirmed of sleep. Study patients hundreds of kilometers away reporting dreams of Weisenfeld's clock after merely seeing a photograph of it online. The vanishing point in 2019. A satellite image of the region briefly appeared on a mapping service. It showed a shadowed clearing with what looked like a tower. When users tried to zoom in again the next day, the clearing was gone, replaced with trees, as if the forest had swallowed it overnight. Some insist the great clock is now moving, perhaps seeking new settlements to wind into its endless rhythm. The final warning: if you ever hear a faint ticking in the woods, stop and listen. If it seems to match your heartbeat, leave immediately. Do not look for the tower. Do not let the whispers and the ticking lull you into sleep. For once the great clock counts you, it will never stop. Tick, 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 tick. The night had grown thicker than ink by the time you find yourself back in the silent streets of Greysteel, the small town that has become your reluctant world. The lamps along the alley flicker with a restless orange hue, barely cutting through the fog that has rolled in like a pale tide from the marshes. It smells faintly of rust and wet stone, and somewhere behind all of it, so faint that it feels like a memory of a sound rather than the sound itself, you hear the slow tick of a clock. Not the regular, comforting tick of a home clock on a mantle. No, this one is uneven, slow, then fast, loud, then so soft you almost question if you heard it at all. It's as if time itself is having trouble walking in a straight line. You glance up at the old clock tower that has ruled the center of Greysteel for over a century. Its face is lit only by the faint spill of moonlight through clouds, and for a moment, you feel it is staring down at you like a lidless eye. It is not midnight. The hands point to something else, an hour that makes no sense. 1 o'clock. And yet also, not 1 o'clock. A crooked alignment, a hand that trembles where it should be still. Inside your mind, a whisper curls, slow and low. You should not be awake for this hour. You remember the words of the old clockmaker's apprentice, the one you met just before the fog rolled in. He had trembled as he handed you a key, insisting that if the ticking grows uneven, you must never open the tower doors. And yet here you are, walking toward them with footsteps too loud for the deserted square. The wood of the tower door is swollen with age and rain. Your key shivers in your hand as you insert it into the iron lock, and then, with a groan that it sounds almost like a breath exhaling after 100 years, the door swings inward. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Old wood, oil, and something else like iron mixed with wet earth, a scent that reminds you of graves left open in a storm. Then comes the sound. The ticking is louder inside, not just loud but layered, dozens of ticks overlapping, as though the tower is filled with clocks, all slightly out of sync. The staircase winds upward into shadow. Each step creaks beneath your weight, and the rhythm of your footsteps never seems to match the clocks. It's as though the building itself is warning you that you are not supposed to be here. By the time you reach the clock chamber, your breathing is slow and shallow. The massive gears of the old mechanism loom like the bones of some ancient creature. Their teeth grind with painful slowness, scraping old grease and iron filings into the air. Dust dances in the moonlight that filters through the tall, narrow windows. But it is the walls that capture your attention. Every inch of them is lined with clocks. Tall grandfather clocks lean like sentinels against the beams, their pendulums swinging lazily. Small brass carriage clocks sit in rows along shelves, their glass faces dull with time. Pocket watches hang from hooks, their chains swaying as though stirred by some invisible hand. There must be hundreds of them, all ticking, all breathing, all whispering. You take a cautious step closer and notice that the faces of some of the clocks are wrong, not broken, just wrong. A 4 where a 6 should be, a hand that moves counter to its design. One clock has no numbers at all, only a spiral that twists inward into a darkness that seems to have depth. And then you see him at first. You think it's just a shadow leaning against the far wall, but as your eyes adjust, you make out the figure of the clockmaker himself, or what is left of him. A man-shaped silhouette of glass and brass and blackened bone. His face is gone, replaced by a clock dial that ticks with no hands. And yet somehow, you feel his gaze land on you with cold weight. The air seems to vibrate with his voice, though his jaw does not move. Do you know what time it is? Your throat tightens. You want to speak, but the words die in your chest. Because, in that moment, you feel an hour that should not exist pressing against the walls of your mind, a time outside of time. The clockmaker steps forward, and the clocks begin to chime not together, but in a hideous cascade. 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 11, 7, an endless spiral of hours. You back against the railing of the stair, heart hammering. The deep whispers rise, and among them, you finally understand the ghost's curse. He had not built the clocks to keep time. He had built them to hold it back, to chain it, to trap pieces of eternity in glass and gears. When the townsfolk accused him of madness and sealed the tower, they unknowingly left the curse to fester. Now, with the door open, all the hours he trapped are spilling into the world. Time slips, stretches, folds in on itself. You see a glimpse of the square outside, flickering between dawn, dusk, and a noon that lasts only a heartbeat. The ghost tilts his head, and though there are no eyes, you feel the weight of a grin. Another hour joins the collection. He says, or perhaps thinks, and the room tilts. When you wake, or perhaps you never slept, you are lying on the floor of the clock tower. All is silent. Dust drifts lazily, and the gears are still. Slowly, you rise, your legs unsteady. The tower feels empty, abandoned for decades. But when you glance at your wristwatch, the hands spin wildly, pausing only to land on an hour that does not exist. You step outside into the square. It is dawn. A soft mist clings to the stones, and somewhere in the fog a bell chimes 13 times. And in that moment, you wonder, have you escaped the curse? Or are you now simply keeping time for him? It begins, as most quiet horrors do, with a letter. The envelope is cream-colored and heavy, its edges slightly frayed as if it has traveled far, though the postmark is smudged and unreadable. Your name is written in a precise, looping hand that seems old-fashioned, the kind of penmanship learned in candlelight rather than fluorescent classrooms. When you slit it open, the paper inside exhales a faint smell of lavender, or perhaps dust. You are cordially invited to the reopening of Merriwick House, upon the anniversary of its founding. Saturday next, at dusk. No sender is listed, but at the bottom is a strange mark, a black wax seal pressed into the shape of an open eye. Stare at it for a long moment, and a cold, familiar unease coils low in your stomach. Merriwick House. The name pulls at your memory like a loose thread. And then you recall the whispers, the stories the older townsfolk muttered at the market when they thought you weren't listening. A house that had been empty for 30 years. A house whose last residents vanished without a word, leaving their supper half-eaten and the lamps burning in the hall. A house that locals claimed would sometimes appear in the morning mist at the edge of the moors, and sometimes not at all. That evening, curiosity gnaws at you. You search your shelves for the old town records and find a thin booklet on local history. There it is, Merriwick House, built in 1882 by industrialist Thaddeus Merriwick. He had been an eccentric man with a penchant for collecting items of spiritual and historical significance, which, according to the archivist's dry notes, mostly meant he bought the morbid leftovers of other people's lives. Masks from plague-stricken villagers, carved effigies pulled from riverbed, a bed frame said to have been used in an exorcism. The last record of the house is dated 1899. A brief note, all occupants missing, property closed by order of the sheriff. The book offers nothing else. Saturday arrives with a sky the color of pewter, the air damp with the promise of rain. You find yourself at the edge of the moors as the sun sinks, letter clutched in your pocket. Merriwick House rises from the fog as if it has always been there. Its facade is grey and solemn, the windows tall and narrow like the eyes of a sleeping animal. A spiked iron fence surrounds the grounds, and the gate hangs open as though expecting. You hesitate, glancing over your shoulder. The road behind you is empty, the mist already swallowing it whole. Inside the gate, the garden is wild and overgrown. Roses have crawled up the porch, their petals blackened as though burned by frost. The door is massive oak, carved with spiraling patterns that make you dizzy if you stare too long. When you knock, the sound is swallowed by the house, and after a long moment, the door swings open on its own. The foyer is a cathedral of shadow. A chandelier of tarnished brass hangs overhead, its candles lit and dripping. A grand staircase rises in the center, carpeted in deep red that seems to drink the light. Dust lies thick along the banisters, yet no footprints mar it, not even your own. From somewhere deeper in the house comes the faint sound of music. A violin, slow and mournful. Hello. Your voice trembles as it echoes off the walls. No answer. You wander from room to room, your unease growing with each step. The dining hall is set for a feast that never came. Crystal glasses catch the candlelight, and silverware glints beside plates of porcelain yellowed with age. The chairs are pulled out slightly, as though the guests had just risen in the parlor. Portraits line the wall, solemn figures with eyes that seem to follow you. One painting in particular holds you captive. A family of 4, all pale and dressed in black, standing in front of this very house. The The mother's hands rest on the shoulders of a young girl and boy. Their faces are indistinct, blurred as if the painter had lost interest in the children halfway through. Lightning flares outside the tall windows, and for an instant, the blurred faces seem clearer, smiling. Too wide, you step back, heart hammering, and the house seems to sigh around you. The music drifts closer, and you follow it up the grand staircase. The halls are lined with mirrors, tall, ornate things with gilded frames. Yet as you pass them, you notice your reflection is delayed, a second too slow, like the house is thinking before returning your image. At the end of the hall, a door creaks open and the violin music swells. You push the door wider and find yourself in a vast ballroom. The floorboards gleam as though freshly polished, and moonlight streams through a high glass dome. But you are not alone. Figures stand in the corners of the room, unmoving, in shadow. They are dressed in outdated evening clothes, waistcoats, gowns with trailing skirts, but their faces are pale and still. One lifts an arm slowly, as though remembering a dance. Another tilts her head towards you, her neck bending a little too far. The violin music does not come from any visible musician. It simply exists, thrumming through the air like a heartbeat. The letter in your pocket burns cold against your skin as the first figure steps forward. You realize that the invitation was never asking you to visit out, it was asking you to stay. The first figure moves with an eerie elegance, gliding rather than stepping, its shoes whispering over the polished floor. You take an involuntary step back, and the letter in your pocket seems to pulse against your thigh, a heartbeat that isn't yours. The figure is a man at least. He looks like one. His suit is a deep old-fashioned charcoal, and a black ribbon circles his throat like a noose. His face is pale as unbaked porcelain, his eyes clouded with an opalescent sheen. He does not blink. Behind him the other figures stir. A woman in a moth-eaten lavender gown drags the train of her dress, the fabric leaving trails in the dustless floor. A child giggles softly, the sound bubbling up from the corner where a small, stiff silhouette crouches. You try to speak. Are you? Your voice is strangled, your throat dry as bone. The music swells. It's no longer a single violin but an orchestra, rising from the walls, the floor, the very air around you. A waltz, lilting and deliberate. The man in the charcoal suit offers his hand, fingers impossibly long. He does not speak, but the intent is clear. Dance. You shake your head and stumble back, and the music falters for a single, shivering note. A ripple passes through the room, a silent displeasure. The woman in lavender lifts her face, and you finally see her eyes, black hollows, yawning like the house's windows. She smiles, her teeth small and neat and too numerous, a second row glinting wetly behind the first. The music begins again, louder now, insistent, and you feel it not just in your ears, but in your muscles. Your legs twitch with the rhythm, your feet sliding across the floor almost against your will. Your body remembers a dance you never learned. One step forward. The man's cold hand closes around yours. The dance begins. It's like moving through a dream, the room spinning around. You, the faces of the silent guests blurring and reforming with each turn. The man's grip is firm, guiding, and his body is impossibly cold, like holding a statue come to life. As the waltz flows, the other guests join in. Figures emerge from the shadows, their numbers swelling until the room is a whirl of motion and color, gowns that shed dust like moth wings, coattails flaring like tattered flags. Their faces are all wrong, blurred, stretched, or frozen in expressions that do not match the rhythm of the dance. You glimpse the little girl from the portrait, her face sharp and clear now. She grins at you as she twirls with an invisible partner, and when she spins, her head turns too far, keeping her gaze locked on yours. Somewhere deep in the house, a bell tolls. At its first chime, the music cuts off. The dancers freeze, their movements halting mid-step like marionettes with cut strings. The silence is crushing. The man holding your hand turns his head toward the ballroom's high glass dome, as if listening for something. Slowly, almost mechanically, he releases your fingers. A single voice breaks the stillness. It is a whisper, yet it fills the room. Another has come to stay. The dancers begin to retreat, melting into the walls, the corners, the mirrors. The last to leave is the little girl, who pauses in the doorway and beckons you with one cold finger. Against your better judgment, you follow. She leads you down a narrow hallway that smells of damp stone and old iron. The walls are lined with sconces, but the flames are weak and guttering, shadows clinging stubbornly to the corners. Your footsteps echo, but hers do not. Finally, she stops before a door at the end of the hall. It is small and unassuming, its wood gray with age. She presses a tiny hand to the panel, and the door swings open with a sigh. The room beyond is a nursery. It is exactly as it must have been 30 years ago. A rocking horse waits in one corner, its paint cracked and peeling. A mobile hangs over a crib, its faded moons and stars spinning slowly in a breeze you cannot feel, but the crib is not empty. Inside lies a bundle of what you think is cloth, gray and fraying. As you step closer, the bundle twitches a whisper, curls from it, soft and hungry. Stay up. The girl climbs into the crib and nestles beside the bundle, her eyes never leaving yours. Thaddeus built the house to last forever. she says, her voice flat and mechanical, like she's reciting a lesson. But he needed help. He needed us. She tilts her head. And now, he needs you. The temperature drops sharply, and the air grows heavy with the smell of damp soil and iron. Behind you, the nursery door slams shut. When you whirl around, the mirrors on the wall ripple like water dart in them. Your reflection smiles, but you do not. The reflection in the nursery mirror leans closer, its grin stretching wider than your face should allow. You stagger back, but the glass surface ripples again. Like something just beneath the surface is pressing forward. The little girl in the crib tilts her head, her curls bouncing in slow, unnatural rhythm. "Don't be afraid," she says, though her voice carries no comfort. "The house likes you," you manage to croak. I don't want it to." The girl's smile fades, and for the first time, you see her as she truly is. Skin waxy and gray, lips cracked, and small black veins spidering down her neck. Her eyes, though, burn with a wet light. "You don't get to choose," she says, softly. The bundle beside her shifts again. A small, pale hand slips free of the rotting cloth. It's tiny, infant-like, and yet the fingers are long, impossibly long, curling toward you like a beckoning gesture. Your chest tightens, and for a moment you swear you can feel your heartbeat falter. The air tastes of rust. Then a voice fills the room, not from the girl, not from the bundle, but from the walls themselves. "Stay, we will keep you safe, we will make you forever." The words vibrate in your bones, crawling under your skin. The letter in your pocket grows hot, and you yank it free with trembling hands. The ink has changed. Where the letter once read, "Welcome to Merriwick House," it now says, "One of us or none of you." The girl hops down from the crib and steps closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "You don't have to be scared," she whispers. "It doesn't hurt after the first part." The walls pulse, the old wallpaper squirming as if something beneath it is breathing. The room darkens, shadows stretching and curling like fingers. You back up until your spine hits the door, but it doesn't budge. The mirror across from you shivers, and your reflection presses its hand to the glass. It mouths a word you don't want to understand. "Choose." The house rumbles. The girl looks up at you expectantly. "Stay with us. Dance forever. Be part of the house." Your voice cracks, and if I say no, the girl's smile returns. "But now it's wrong. Then the house will take all of you anyway, but in pieces." The mirror bulges outward, the glass stretching like skin. Your reflection is no longer mimicking you, it's reaching for you. Its fingers press through the slick, soft surface. The air grows thick and wet, and the sound of the distant ballroom swells again. A waltz, slow and patient. The girl takes your hand. Her grip is ice. "Dance," she says, "or be devoured." You close your eyes. The music burrows into your mind, and you feel the rhythm claim your legs. Your feet move without your consent, sliding into the steps the house remembers. The girl giggles and spins you in a small circle. The mirror opens like a mouth, and you are pulled forward not by the girl, but by yourself. You tumble through the glass and into the ballroom again, though. Now it is endless, stretching in every direction. The guests whirl around you, countless now, their faces flickering between masks of joy and masks of agony. Your partner is your reflection, grinning, its skin beginning to peel, its eyes black pits. The house's voice sighs content. "Yes, this one will do." Far away, or maybe very close, you hear the front door of Merriwick House creak open. A cold wind sweeps the ballroom, and somewhere, in the dark belly of the house, a bell tolls once more. The bell echoes, long and low, like the heartbeat of something buried deep in the earth. Your reflection releases you, and you stumble backward across the polished black floor. The ballroom spins, the music warping into a twisted, off-key version of itself. All the dancers stop. Hundreds of heads turn in perfect unison toward you. Their eyes are empty sockets, black and glistening, but you feel them seeing you. From the balcony above, the little girl appears again, holding the rotting bundle. Her voice carries clear and sharp as a knife. "Are you ready to belong to the house?" Your mouth is dry. I didn't say I, but the house doesn't wait for permission. The floor ripples beneath your feet, and the dancers close in. Their skeletal fingers graze your arms, cold and damp, leaving streaks of black ichor. The music swells louder, drilling into your skull. Then the walls of the ballroom breathe with a single, shuddering inhale. The house pulls the world into darkness. You feel the floor vanish beneath you. You fall not down, but sideways, as if the room itself tilted you into a place no human was ever meant to see. Your body hits something soft and wet. The air reeks of mold, iron, and old graves. You are in the belly of the house. The walls are no longer wood or plaster, they are meat, veined and pulsing. Shadows crawl along the slick surfaces. Faces press against the walls from inside, stretching, the flesh, mouthing silent screams. One of them is yours. You stagger back, and your own face on the wall opens its eyes. "Help me," it whispers. The little girl's voice surrounds you, now echoing from every wall. No one leaves. They all said yes eventually. You stumble through the corridor, the floor sucking at your shoes, your hands sliding against the walls that pulse with slow, wet life. Behind you, the ballroom music rises again, no longer violins, but a chorus of human voices wailing in perfect waltz-time. That house is singing. You round a corner and see the front door ahead. It's open, moonlight spills in, cold air cuts through. The rot and blood. Freedom. You run, your heart pounding, each step sinking in the spongy floor. The doorway grows closer, 10 feet. 5-3, then the door slams shut. The girl stands there now, blocking your escape. She's holding the bundle out to you, and this time the cloth falls away completely. It isn't a baby, it's a heart. Massive, black-veined, still beating. The house's heart. Take it, she says, or it takes you. The walls pulse faster, the faces scream. Your own reflection crawls out of the floor and grabs your legs. The heart pulses in her hands, spraying tiny droplets of blood onto the rotting floor. You reach out. The moment your hands touch the slick, beating organ, the house screams in triumph. The walls convulse, shadows burst from the cracks. Every door in the house slams in rhythm with the heart, and then silence. When you open your eyes, you are standing in the entryway again. Sunlight pours through the dusty windows. The house is quiet. The letter lies at your feet. It says only, "Welcome home." You hear footsteps behind you. A family is entering the house, smiling, laughing, carrying boxes. You try to scream, to warn them, but no sound comes out. Your reflection in the hall mirror watches them approach and it smiles. The radio wasn't supposed to turn on by itself. You had picked it up from a yard sale that morning. A battered, old shortwave model from the 1970s. The man selling it seemed eager to get rid of it, almost too eager. "It still works," he'd said, pushing it into your hands. "Just don't leave it on at night." At the time, you laughed it off. Now, sitting in your apartment with the lights low, you watch as the radio's dial glows faintly green. It hums with a soft, steady pulse, though your fingers are nowhere near the knobs. Then, through the static, a voice emerges. It's faint, like someone speaking through a long tunnel. "Can anyone hear me?" You freeze. Your apartment is silent otherwise. The city outside your window is gone still. The usual hum of cars and nightlife oddly absent. "Please." The voice crackles again. "I don't have long." Against your better judgment, you answer, hello. The static swells, then quiets. "You can hear me." Relief floods the voice, but it's tinged with something else, fear. "Good. I need you to listen carefully. It's coming for me." The transmission cuts to a high-pitched whine, then another voice, sharper, closer, whispers through the speakers. "Don't answer him." Your skin prickles. The first voice comes back, frantic. "Please don't listen to that. It's lying. I'm trapped. I've been trapped for days." The second voice interrupts, smooth and cold. "If you help him, it will find you too." The radio hisses violently, the two voices clashing over each other until words dissolve into screeching static. You fumble for the power switch. It doesn't work. Instead, the dial begins to turn on its own, cycling through dead channels, catching on bursts of whispers, screams, and distorted laughter. Then it stops, and the voice that speaks next is your own. "Why did you turn it on?" it asks. You slam the radio's power switch again, but it doesn't turn off. Your own voice continues to whisper through the static. You shouldn't have answered. Your chest tightens. A cold draft slithers through the apartment, even though all the windows are shut. You rip the cord from the wall, sparks flash, and the radio finally goes silent. For a long moment, you just stand there, heart hammering, listening to the apartment settle. Then, a faint hiss. You freeze. It's coming from your phone. The screen lights up on its own. A music app opens. Then, instead of a song, the same static fills the room. And beneath it, the first voice again. "Please, I'm running out of time." It can travel anywhere now. It knows your name. The voice is clearer this time, closer, almost as if the speaker is inside your apartment. You shove your phone face down on the couch and grab your keys. Whatever this is, you can't stay here. The hallway outside your apartment feels wrong. Fluorescent. Lights flicker overhead, casting long, twitching shadows. You head for the stairs, but halfway down, you hear the hum of static again. It's coming from the building's intercom system. Your breath catches as your own distorted voice echoes down the stairwell. Running won't help. Outside, the city is quiet. Too quiet. The usual traffic, the distant rumble of trains, even the occasional shout from the bar down the street, all gone. Only the faint whisper of static drifts on the air. You walk quickly, trying not to look at the darkened windows of the shops and apartments. But then you notice something that makes your stomach drop. Every storefront television you pass flickers on. No commercials, no shows, just your reflection, fractured and distorted in static, lips moving silently before a faint whisper seeps from the speakers. You can't turn it off. Then, for the first time, you see movement at the far end of the empty street. A figure steps into the light. It's wrong, too tall, too thin. Its movements are jerky, like someone learning to walk. For the first time, and as it tilts its head toward you, the static grows louder, pouring from every device in sight. Your phone buzzes violently in your pocket. You don't want to look, but you do. A text message fills the screen. "Don't let IT touch you." You bolt. The quiet city blurs around you as you sprint past dark storefronts, the static swelling louder with every step. You can't tell if it's coming from your phone, the streetlights, or inside your own skull. You turn a corner and freeze. Halfway down the alley, a public phone booth crackles to life, its receiver swinging wildly, his SSSSS, a voice yours through the night. You can't keep running, your chest heaves. Sweat drips into your eyes. Then from behind, the thing moves. The sound isn't footsteps, it's distorted as though reality itself is skipping. Every time the static spikes, the figure is closer. You dive into the phone booth, slam the door shut, and grab the receiver. Hello. The line is alive with whispering. Hundreds of voices, maybe thousands, then a single, trembling sentence cuts through. It can travel through anything that carries a signal. We try to contain it, but the voice breaks into coughs, then into static. Don't let it in. The figure is right outside now. Through the glass, its face is nothing but a blur of pixels, like a human shape rendered in bad reception. Its head twitches, and then for the first time you hear its voice. Answer. The word vibrates the glass of the booth. Your phone buzzes in your pocket again, you know, with a bone-deep certainty that if you answer, something will come through. You do the only thing you can think of. You throw the phone into the street. It shatters, but the static doesn't stop. Instead, the broken pieces begin to speak in unison. Can't hide forever. The figure phases through the glass of the booth like water rippling around a stone that reaches for you. And the moment its flickering hand brushes your chest, the world cuts to static. You're somewhere else. A blank, white room that hums like a detuned television. Dozens of other people are here, men, women, children, all frozen mid-scream, their bodies distorted, faces stretched into static noise. One turns to you. It's you. Another version of you, lips trembling. It keeps recording us, they whisper. Every time we answer, another piece gets copied until there's nothing left. Somewhere far away, you hear your apartment radio click on again. Please, don't answer the next call. Then the world flickers and you wake up back in your apartment. The radio is silent. Your phone lies on the floor, cracked but dark. You try to breathe, to convince yourself it was a nightmare. Then, slowly the screen lights up. Unknown caller. Stare at the glowing screen. The room is silent except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above you. The phone vibrates in your hand, each pulse echoing in your bones. Your reflection in the cracked screen looks wrong, like it's lagging. A half second behind your movements, you consider smashing the phone, throwing it out the window, running, but deep down you know it won't matter. The signal will find another way. The call keeps ringing. Each chime stretches, distorts, and blends into a wave of static. From the corner of your eye, you see movement. The shadows in the room are shifting, warping toward the phone like they're being pulled by gravity. Your own shadow stretches across the wall, head tilting toward the device, mouth opening though you make no sound. You whisper to yourself, don't answer, don't answer. But your thumb moves on its own. Click. For a moment, there is silence, then a single breath, and a voice, faint but clear. You are now part of the network. The room darkens, not like the lights turned off, but like color and meaning are draining from reality. Your fingers dissolve into a cloud of static suddenly. You're falling through wires, screens, and glowing signals, racing past every phone tower, every Wi-Fi router, every living room with an open laptop. You see faces in the static. People just like you. Some scream, some whisper warnings, some just watch. Then you land. A white void. An infinite wall of screens stretches in every direction. Each screen shows your apartment. In perfect real time, you see yourself sitting on the floor, phone in hand, blank-eyed. Except that isn't you anymore. You're in the screen. You're the static. A final voice fills the void. The signal must spread. And then, like a virus moving through circuits, you are transmitted through televisions, radios, phones, through someone else's apartment, through someone else's hand as their phone lights up with unknown caller. Ring. When you picture a medieval town, the first thing that might come to mind is the sight of crooked timber-bird houses, cobblestone streets, and the occasional market square bustling with merchants and farmers. But what's often left out of that picture is the smell. In the early morning hours, as dawn broke over European towns, the air carried a strange combination of scents, sometimes unpleasant, sometimes surprisingly pleasant. This is where the curious story of the cinnamon dawn comes into play. By the 13th and 14th centuries, many towns across Europe had adopted a series of daily rituals to manage their waste and prepare for the markets and fairs that defined town life. Despite modern stereotypes about medieval filth, there was an odd sense of order to the mess. Street cleaning was a responsibility, often falling to lower status residents or hired laborers, done in the hours just before sunrise. This meant that if you were awake early enough, you'd see individuals moving with wooden rakes and rough straw brooms, clearing away everything that had accumulated the day before. Horse manure, bits of hay, discarded food, and sometimes worse, things that had been tossed into the streets. Once the cleaning was done, or at least partially completed, many towns had a peculiar practice of freshening the streets. Historical records from towns like Bruges, Lübeck, and certain districts of London and Paris mention that sweet-smelling herbs or spices were occasionally sprinkled over the cobblestones in the early morning, especially on market days. Cinnamon was one of the most famous of these, though it wasn't the only scent used. Dried lavender, rosemary, and even crushed juniper berries were part of this aromatic effort. Why cinnamon? In part, it was psychological. A pleasant smell was associated with a healthier, cleaner space in a world where miasma theory, the idea that bad smells cause disease, was widely accepted. Town officials believed that perfuming the streets could reduce the spread of illnesses, particularly in times of seasonal sickness. But there was also a social element. The first merchants arriving with carts of bread, cheese, meat, or cloth would step into streets that seemed freshened, almost festive. Wealthy towns wanted to present themselves as orderly and prosperous, and a touch of cinnamon in the air did just that, of course. There was a practical limit to this aromatic ritual. Cinnamon was imported from far-off places Sri Lanka via Arab and Venetian traders, making it expensive. Most towns did not scatter pure cinnamon everywhere. Instead, they used diluted infusions, water boiled with cheap spices and perhaps a little actual cinnamon bark, then splashed along key thoroughfares leading to the market square or cathedral. Wealthier districts might get the full treatment, while poorer alleyways received nothing at all. This created an odd sensory geography. Imagine walking from the outskirts of town before dawn. The air would be heavy with the smells of livestock, mud, and wood smoke from morning fires. Then, as you approached the heart of the town, you'd begin to notice the faint sweetness in the air, a mixture of herbs, spice water, and the lingering aroma of baked bread from nearby kitchens. In some places, particularly in German-speaking towns, chroniclers even commented on the delightfully strange effect of a morning walk that transitioned from the rough scent of the countryside to the civilized perfume of the market square. Another piece of this puzzle is the daily rhythm of urban life. People often underestimate how early medieval towns woke up. The idea of sleeping in until mid-morning simply didn't exist for most working people. Bakers were among the first to stir, starting their ovens around midnight or 1 a.m. to have bread ready for the early buyers. Following them were the butchers, brewers, and milk sellers, each with their own morning tasks. In this way, by the time the sun crept over the rooftops, the town had already been alive for hours. That's when the street cleaners and spice sprinklers would finish their work, leaving a fleeting fragrance for the townsfolk and travelers alike. The effect was most pronounced during festival periods or major market days. Historical accounts of Bruges in the 1400s note that before large fairs, town officials would order the streets to be cleansed and strewn with herbs. In Florence, there were similar practices in the wealthy neighborhoods, where not just cinnamon but also myrtle and thyme were used to impress visiting dignitaries. It seems almost contradictory to our modern image of the Middle Ages. A world we imagine as perpetually muddy and grimy could, on occasion, smell faintly of spiced wine and morning bread. Still, this wasn't a daily paradise. Once the day got going, the cinnamon dawn quickly gave way to the usual realities. The streets would fill with people, carts, and animals. Waste would begin to accumulate again. The smell of tanning leather, brewing beer, roasting meat, and the less pleasant aromas of unwashed bodies and open sewers would reclaim the air. The sweet morning perfume was only a temporary illusion, a little gift to the senses before the busyness of medieval life took over, and yet it worked. The fleeting cinnamon scent became part of the town's rhythm, a quiet symbol that the day had officially begun. Travelers often noted that the morning felt different, almost ceremonial, in towns that observed these rituals, even if the streets would soon return to their usual state. The first hours carried a sense of intention, a desire to bring order to chaos, if only for a little while. But how did this tradition start? Was it always about cleanliness, or was there a deeper social or political meaning hidden in this daily ritual? By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the world of medieval Europe was shifting. Towns were growing, trade networks were expanding, and new ideas about health, hygiene, and urban life began to take root. The ritual of perfuming the streets at dawn, while charming in its own way, slowly began to fade. Several factors contributed to the decline of the cinnamon dawn. The first was urban expansion. Early medieval towns were compact, with narrow streets and tightly packed homes, which made it feasible for a handful of workers to sweep and splash aromatic water across the main market streets. But as towns grew into bustling cities, like Paris, London, and Antwerp, the scale of the task became overwhelming. Perfuming a few main thoroughfares was one thing. Trying to scent an entire city of 100,000 people was nearly impossible. The second factor was economic practicality. Spices like cinnamon were always expensive imports, and the rise of global trade only underscored their value. By the Renaissance, cinnamon was not merely a luxury for aristocrats and merchants, but also a crucial ingredient in the booming spice trade economy. It became increasingly difficult for city councils to justify sprinkling cinnamon water on the streets when those same spices could fetch high profits in kitchens or apothecaries. In many places, the practice shifted to using cheaper local herbs or faded altogether. The third, and perhaps most interesting factor, was changing ideas of hygiene. The medieval belief in miasma, the notion that bad smells cause disease, began to give way to new approaches to public health. Even before the discovery of germs, city officials realized that cleaning streets and improving waste removal was more effective than simply masking smells with cinnamon or lavender water. By the 16th century, many cities focused on building better drainage, moving tanneries and slaughterhouses outside the walls, and establishing more formal sanitation policies. A perfumed morning was no longer seen as a substitute for true cleanliness, yet the memory of those scented mornings lingered in literature and local traditions. Travelers in the early Renaissance occasionally wrote about towns that still held onto the ritual, particularly in Germany and the Low Countries. A 1521 diary from a merchant visiting Bruges mentions the streets strewn with juniper and the air sweetened by waters of spice before the sun did rise, suggesting that at least some vestiges remained, but for the most part by the dawn of the modern age, the cinnamon mornings had become a quaint memory of a smaller, slower world. Interestingly, this shift also reflects a larger cultural transformation. The medieval cinnamon dawn was less about actual sanitation and more about the symbolism of order and prosperity. It was a ritual, a little act of civility against the chaos of life. Its disappearance marks the movement toward a world where appearance gave way to systematized infrastructure and symbolic gestures were replaced by practical solutions. By the 17th century, the sense of Europe's cities had changed dramatically. Instead of the fleeting perfume of cinnamon or lavender at dawn, the dominant urban smells were now from bakeries, breweries, tanneries, and unavoidably human waste. It would not be until the 19th century, with the rise of modern urban sanitation and the invention of piped water and sewer systems, that city air would begin to resemble anything close to the freshness medieval people once tried to create with spices. And yet, there's something poetic about that short-lived ritual. For a brief moment each morning, as dawn broke and the first merchants rolled their carts into the square, a medieval town could feel enchanted, its streets glistening with water, its air carrying the warm, sweet scent of cinnamon and herbs. The ritual might be gone, but in the quiet corners of history, it remains one of those small, almost magical details that make when you imagine a medieval European town. The first thoughts that often come to mind are muddy streets, wooden beams, and perhaps the clanging of a blacksmith's hammer. By now, though, you have walked with me through the quiet streets at dawn, where the world was far less chaotic than the midday bustle that would soon come. And now, as we approach the closing chapter of this sleepy journey, we must focus on the subtler rhythms of life that allowed that morning aroma, spices, smoke, and humanity to exist at all. At this point in the morning, the earliest activities of the day were already in motion. Bakers had lit their fires well before sunrise, not simply to make bread, but also to prepare doughs infused with precious ingredients like cinnamon, cloves, or nutmeg for wealthy households or festival days. Ordinary bread smelled comforting yeast, warmth, a hint of smoke butts. It was the pastries or honeyed rolls brushed with a whisper of spice that truly defined the memory of morning air. Imagine walking past a wooden shutter left slightly open, and the aroma of baked apples dusted with imported cinnamon slipping into the cool, damp fog of an empty street. The streets themselves were also part of this experience. You might not think of paving stones or wooden planks as aromatic, but in a medieval town they were alive with scents. Rain and dew, soaked into timbers and earth, mixing with the faint smoke of last night's fires. The scent of horses, stables, and hay lingered like the base notes of a perfume, while the tang of tanneries or fishmongers still dormant at this hour waited for the sun to release them fully. It was a delicate balance, a fleeting moment before the living city awoke in full. Merchants, too, were part of this morning symphony. Spice sellers kept their most valuable stock carefully sealed, but even the act of unpacking wares for the day could release a hint of the east into the air. A small pinch of cinnamon falling to a wooden table, a cracked nutmeg ground for a wealthy client, or the simple opening of cloth sacks might scent the lane briefly, just enough to leave someone passing by wondering why the air tasted almost sweet. But these mornings also carried the sounds of preparation, subtle and deliberate. A wooden bucket scraping along a cobbled lane as someone drew water from the town well. A dog stretching and padding silently down an alley, sniffing the remnants of yesterday. Somewhere a rooster crowed, but it was muffled by distance and the heavy wooden walls of homes built tight for warmth. As the sun rose higher, life accelerated. The blacksmith began hammering. Children ran errands for their parents. Vendors began to shout, wooden carts rumbled over stones, and the smells of the day shifted from a tender warmth to something heavier. Sweat, livestock, smoke, and food cooking in earnest. That fleeting window where the town smelled like cinnamon. At dawn, where the air was a blend of anticipation and quiet labor, faded into the busy living city. Yet, if you lived in that time, this memory was constant. It was one of the few moments each day that belonged to the ordinary townsfolk before life became crowded with obligations. The smell of cinnamon at dawn was a whisper of luxury in a world of labor. It was fleeting and fragile, but perhaps that was why it mattered. As we step out of this morning and into the hum of the waking town, I leave you with one last thought. If we could step back in time for just a moment, would we notice the same details they did the damp wood, the hint of spice, the silence before the world began? Or would our modern minds be too loud to catch it before a castle wall could ever loom over the countryside? It began its life quietly, deep in the earth. Medieval walls were not conjured in a single season, they were centuries in the making. Though most of that time passed in darkness, with no hint of the stone's future grandeur, imagine the stone as it once was, a part of the bedrock pressed under soil and roots, weathering the slow creep of seasons. Rainwater trickled through cracks, frost expanded and retreated. Each mineral vein was etched over millennia, patiently waiting for a mason's chisel to one day reveal it. When a lord or a king declared that a new fortress would rise, the first step was not on the construction site, it was in the quarry. A quarry in the medieval world was a place of methodical labor, more hushed than bustling markets or roaring battlefields. Masons and laborers chipped carefully, wedging wooden stakes into narrow cuts and wetting them so the swelling wood might split the stone cleanly. The sound was subtle, a rhythmic tapping, the occasional groan of stone partying, and the murmur of men working in quiet concentration. Once freed, the blocks were shaped roughly on site. They would spend days or weeks exposed to open air for the first time, drying in the sun, their damp earth smell lifting into the breeze. If you had stood there, you would notice a scent like wet chalk or clay, mixed with the wood smoke of campfires, where laborers cooked simple meals. These blocks, some small enough to carry and others needing carts or sledges, were not yet part of any war. They were simply stones waiting for purpose. Transporting the stones to the castle grounds was itself a slow ritual. Oxen and carts creaked along rutted paths, leaving trails of mud and crushed grass. Workers often walked alongside, guiding their cargo, as villagers watched the parade of stone passing through like a silent army of future walls. By the time of stone reached the construction site, it had already lived many lives, hidden in the earth, split in the quarry, shaped by hand, and hauled across the countryside. Only then did it begin the slow process of becoming part of something larger, something that would stand for centuries, perhaps outliving the mason who touched it first. This is the first chapter in the life cycle of a medieval wall, the birth of stone from the earth and its quiet journey to purpose. Once the stone arrived at the construction site, its transformation into a castle wall began not with a sudden spectacle, but with deliberate ritual and patience. The building of a medieval wall was as much about rhythm as strength. Foundations came first, dug deep into the earth to anchor the future fortress against time and siege. Laborers carried baskets of earth and stone, dumping and leveling under the watch of the master mason. Then came the first layer of rough stones, set into a bed of lime mortar that hissed softly when mixed with water, releasing a faint smell like warm wet shells. Day by day, the wall grew. Imagine standing on the site at dawn. A mist might cling to the low stones, and the air would be filled with the soft scrape of trowels, the thud of mallets on chisels, and the distant clop of oxen hauling more stone. Workers balanced on scaffolding, made of rough timbers, their boots caked in mortar dust. Each stone was fitted like a word in a silent sentence, telling the story of defense and permanence. The wall's inner life began to form. Two medieval walls were rarely solid monoliths. They often had two dressed stone faces filled with a rubble core. You could imagine the stones whispering against each other, held together by the slow hardening mortar, as if they were learning to stand as one. Villagers sometimes gathered to watch the walls rise, marveling at the way bare earth transformed into a looming line of power. For them, it was more than construction. It was a promise of safety for enemies, a warning. The wall became a horizon of stone, interrupting the sky. By the time the wall reached its full height, it seemed alive. With human effort, hoists creaked, hammers rang, and the shouts of workers echoed against its growing face. The stones, once cold and buried in silence, now basked in sunlight and wind, a part of something far greater than themselves. The wall had risen, but its life was only beginning. Ahead lay decades, even centuries, of weather, war, and watchfulness. The wall, now complete, entered the long season of its purpose, to watch, to endure, and to defend. For years, life along the ramparts was steady and solemn. Guards patrolled the crenellations, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone, the rhythm of protection. In spring, wildflowers sprouted in the cracks near the base, and swallows nested in small gaps where mortars hadn't sealed perfectly. In winter, frost bit into the walls, joints, and icy winds hissed through arrow slits, whispering to the stone that from the wall's perspective, if it could think, it felt the pulse of the castle's life through vibrations and sound, the ringing of the chapel bell, the blacksmith's hammer, the distant laughter of children, yet it also felt tension. Soldiers leaned against its battlements watching the tree line for movement, listening for the crunch of unseen footsteps. Then came the first test. A warning horn shattered the calm one gray dawn. From the wall's height, riders were spotted on the horizon on enemy banner fluttering like a dark omen. The garrison sprang into action, Archers clambered up, their quivers rattling. Boiling water and stones were prepared. The wall became a living theater of defense. Its very structure the difference between life and ruin. As arrows flew and ladders clattered against its sides, the wall absorbed the violence. Stones chipped and splintered. Mortar cracked. A boulder from a trebuchet struck with a shudder that rippled down to its foundation. The wall felt pain, in its own way, but it held. Soldiers behind it shouted and fought, alive because it stood. When the battle ended and the enemy retreated, the wall was scarred but proud. New mortar filled its wounds. Its stones were blackened in places with smoke, but in the stillness of night, under the moonlight, it seemed to rest like a watchful beast, patient and eternal. Through decades of sieges, rains, and sun, the wall bore witness to love, betrayal, and triumph. Yet even stone can tire. Moss crept along its base, roots probed its cracks, and each winter's freeze gnawed at its heart. But still, it stood silent, solemn, and steadfast. The centuries rolled on like clouds across the sky. The wall, once the pride of the castle, had defended its people through war and winter. Yet time, relentless as any invading army, began to claim it piece by piece. The lords who had built it were gone buried in the chapel crypt. Their children and grandchildren ruled for a time, but peace spread across the land, and the castle's importance faded. No more soldiers marched along its battlements. No more archers leaned against its crenellations. The wall stood alone, a guardian without a purpose. Seasons etched their mark upon it. Spring rainwater seeped into tiny cracks, feeding moss and vines. Birds nested in arrow slits, their songs replacing the shouts of soldiers. Summer sunlight warmed the old stones, and weeds grew in the courtyard below. Travelers passing by gazed at it in awe, unaware of the battles it had survived. Autumn leaves fell and gathered in its corners, softening the harshness of stone with nature's gentle touch. Winter ice formed in the cracks, widening them year by year. Sections of the wall groaned and crumbled, leaving jagged edges like broken teeth. One night, during a particularly harsh storm, lightning split a tower in two. The wall felt the tremor, like the memory of a long-forgotten battle. Stones tumbled into the moat, splashing water that had not seen movement in years. No one came to repair it. In time, the castle became a ruin. Travelers whispered of ghosts wandering the halls, and local shepherds led their flocks through its shadow without fear. Ivy wrapped the wall like a shroud, and wildflowers bloomed where once soldiers had fallen. Yet there was a dignity in this. Slow decay, the wall had fulfilled its duty. It had sheltered generations, witnessed love and death, and stood unbroken against both man and nature until time itself became its conqueror. When moonlight bathed its crumbling stones, the wall no longer felt abandoned, it felt eternal. It knew that long after humans forgot its name, the wind would still sing through its cracks, and the earth would remember the shape of its foundation. Centuries passed, and the castle walls slept beneath ivy and shadow. The world beyond changed, in ways it could scarcely comprehend. Empires rose and fell, villages became towns, and new roads wound across the hills. Yet, the wall remained, weathered but proud, holding its silent vigil. One day, a group of travelers arrived, scholars, artists, and children with wide eyes. They stepped into the courtyard, their footsteps echoing where knights once marched. "Look at these stones," said a historian, tracing the grooves carved by sword and spear. "This was once a fortress," whispered a young girl, "and now it's a garden." The wall listened. People began to visit more often. They brought brushes and paper, capturing the play of sunlight across the cracks. They took photographs, telling its story to others. Some cleared the weeds, revealing carvings of old crests and initials left by soldiers long gone. Then came the preservationists. They strengthened the foundations and built a small path for visitors. Signs were placed to tell the wall's story, of battles, sieges, and the quiet centuries of solitude. Wall, once a guardian of life and death, became a guardian of memory. Children ran their hands along the cool stone, imagining the clash of swords. Couples took pictures beneath the archways, smiling where soldiers once stood at attention. And in the evenings, when the tourists left and the sun dipped below the hills, the wall could feel the wind again. It whispered through the cracks, carrying voices of the past. It understood now. It would never truly die. As long as someone looked upon it with wonder, its story would continue etched not only in stone but in hearts and minds. I am stone, yet I remember. I was born from earth and fire, carried by hands now turned to dust. I have felt the weight of shields, the tremor of war drums, and the quiet sighs of lovers beneath moonlit battlements. I have bled in rain and cracked in frost. I have watched generations pass like shadows across my face. Once, I was a guardian. Then, I was a ruin. Now, I am a storyteller. Each chisel mark and weathered scar speaks for me, to the children who trace my surface in wonder, to the artists who paint my silhouette against the setting sun. I do not fear the end, because I know I will live on in memory in the hearts of those who pause to listen. I am the wall, and I endure life among the smells by now. You've drifted past the first hour of cobblestone streets, open sewers, and the gentle mystery of morning cinnamon. But the story of smell in medieval towns only deepens when we step inside the houses, workshops, and markets that made these scents so distinct. So, imagine yourself walking quietly into a small medieval town as the day truly begins. Around 6 a.m., the sun is up, but the mist hasn't yet burned off, and the scents that defined daily life are starting to mingle in the air. Inside the half-timbered houses that leaned slightly over the narrow streets, the day began with fire. Not just any fire, wood fires mixed with peat, straw, and occasionally animal dung. Each home had its own unique smell, like a personal fingerprint made of smoke and life. The wealthy families could afford oak or beechwood, which burned cleaner and hotter. Their kitchens smelled faintly of roasted grains and occasional spices. But poorer families had to settle for green wood or dried dung, which filled their homes with a more pungent, earthy scent. Add to this the aroma of baking bread, which drifted from shared bakehouses. Bread was the literal lifeline of the medieval town, and almost every neighborhood had its own oven where households would take turns baking their loaves. By morning, the air was heavy with the scent of rye, wheat, or barley bread, mingling with the sharp tang of smoke. In cities like Paris or London, this would mix with something else entirely, the smell of whetstone and human life, a combination of dirt, sweat, and the faint sourness of fermented drink. And then there was the cinnamon mystery. Why did medieval European towns sometimes smell faintly sweet in the mornings? Part of it came from spices themselves, which were prized, rare, and extremely expensive. Wealthy merchants or households might burn a stick of cinnamon or scatter cloves in their homes to mask the less appealing odors of the city. But there was also the fact that cinnamon and other spices were stored in the ports, warehouses, and markets of trade towns. Ships arriving from the east carried cinnamon, nutmeg, and pepper in burlap sacks, and the scent could drift over the harbor and through streets at dawn, when the cool air held smells like a sponge. If you stood near a port city, say Lübeck, Venice, or Bruges, you might wake to the aroma of cinnamon wafting through the streets. It was like a promise of wealth, or at least a break from the ever-present stink of animals, waste, and tanneries. Speaking of animals, their presence defined the daily smellscape. Chickens wandered freely through streets, scratching at refuse piles. Goats bleated in courtyards. Pigs rooted through alleys and garbage, because pigs were the original city sanitation crew. Cows and horses clopped through town in the early hours, their droppings adding to the ever-present layer of organic life underfoot. In many places, the streets themselves were not paved, meaning they were essentially long, uneven mud tracks, a mixture of soil, straw, rainwater, and the contributions of the animals that lived among humans. City authorities occasionally tried to regulate the mess. They passed laws against dumping waste in streets, but almost everyone ignored them. Chamber pots were emptied out of windows, though some towns required a verbal warning before tossing the contents guard low. In Paris, meaning watch out for the water. In London, it was look out below. But even with warnings, accidents happened. Imagine the morning after a rainy night, the air filled with that unmistakable mix of wet earth, dung, and human life. And then, faintly, a breath of cinnamon drifting in from the docks. Life itself smelled different depending on what job you had. Blacksmiths carried the scent of smoke and hot iron. Bakers smelled of yeast and charred crusts. Tanners were infamous for reeking of the animal hides they processed with urine and lime. In fact, tanners and butchers were often forced to work on the outskirts of town to prevent the stench from overwhelming the entire city. If you walked past the tannery district at dawn, you'd smell something far less pleasant than cinnamon, a combination of rotting flesh, sour urine, and lye. Markets were the other major source of morning scents. Vendors set up their stalls as the sun rose, and the mingling aromas of produce, fish, spices, and livestock created an overwhelming sensory experience. Fishmongers arrived before dawn with their catches. If you were close to the sea, you could smell the brine and salt in the air. If you were inland, the fish were already a day old by the time they reached market, adding a sharpness to the smell. Butchers worked quickly, and the scent of raw meat mixed with straw, mud, and smoke became part of the living, breathing atmosphere of the town. As the town woke, so did its social rhythms. Children fetched water from wells, their wooden buckets scraping the stone. Housewives scrubbed doorsteps with sand and water, adding a faintly mineral smell to the street. Monks or town criers moved through the alleys, their cloaks stirring the air, their sandals clapping against the cobbles. Every smell had a story, and every story was a reflection of life lived in close, unrelenting proximity. The truth is, medieval towns were never silent and never scentless. Smell told you everything. Who was cooking, who was tanning, who was dumping, who was burning cinnamon to hide the realities of life. And yet, those small moments of sweetness, a loaf of fresh bread, a sprig of thyme, a drifting note of cinnamon made life feel richer, if only for a breath. As the sun rises fully over the town and the mist burns away, a new smell begins to dominate, the smell of work. Hammers strike anvils, ovens roar with fire, and carts of hay and manure rumble through the narrow streets. The cinnamon of dawn is fading now, replaced by the steady perfume of daily survival. But here is the question: did people notice? Or had the medieval nose simply accepted this orchestra of odors as normal? If you've walked with me this far through the waking streets of a medieval town, you might have grown used to the chorus of scents: smoke, bread, dung, spice, and human life. But for the people who lived here, smells weren't just background, they were social cues, medical signs, and even moral indicators. In the Middle Ages, most people believed that bad smells could make you sick. This was the miasma theory, the idea that foul airs carried disease. If a street smelled especially rotten, it wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. Doctors and city officials alike thought that the smell of decay, waste, or stagnant water could seep into your body and poison you. That's why cities tried, often in vain, to control the stink. Wealthier citizens would carry pomander, small metal spheres filled with herbs and spices like cloves, nutmeg, or yes, cinnamon. They held them to their noses as they walked through smelly areas, believing the fragrant air would protect them from illness. In fact, during plague years, the smell of burning cinnamon, juniper, and frankincense was a daily ritual. Streets were fumigated with smoke to clean the air. The wealthy burned costly spices in their homes, not just for pleasure, but because they thought it kept death at bay. But smell was also social. People judged each other by how they smelled. A perfumed person signaled wealth and status. A reeking one could be seen as lazy, poor, or morally questionable. Bathing habits were inconsistent. Some towns had public bathhouses, while others avoided them after they were linked to immorality or disease. Instead, people relied on linen shifts, which absorbed sweat and were changed more often than outer clothes. A fresh linen shirt could keep you smelling neutral even if you hadn't bathed in weeks. And if all else failed, a sprig of rosemary pinned to your cloak could mask the musk of life in a crowded city. Interestingly, medieval townspeople didn't notice every bad smell. Your nose adjusts to the scents you live with daily. A modern visitor would gag walking through a tannery district, but to a medieval tanner, the stench was simply work. What caught attention were unusual smells: a sudden sweet spice in the morning, a new batch of fish beginning to rot, or the acrid smell of a house fire. Smell also shaped daily routines and festivals. Market days and fairs were explosions of scent: roasted meats, hot pies, candied nuts, ale, horse manure, and human sweat all mingled in the air. Religious holidays added incense and beeswax candles, which drifted out of churches into the streets. And at night, when torches and hearths filled the air with smoke, towns sometimes smelled like a forest fire, gently laced with cinnamon or pine. Even ideas of beauty and romance were tied to smell. A lover's gift might include a handkerchief perfumed with rosewater or a sachet of dried lavender. Poets described women not just by their hair or eyes, but by how they smelled, sometimes comparing them to spices or spring herbs. In a world where life was always close and crowded, scent was intimacy. By now, the sun is high over the medieval town. The early sweetness of cinnamon is gone, swallowed by the day's real aroma: life, labor, and survival. To the people who lived here, it was simply home. To us, it's a time capsule, carried on the wind. Nightfall and the return of the cinnamon air. As the medieval day draws to a close, the town begins to change once again. The bustling sounds of hammers, merchants, and market chatter fade. Stalls close, shutters slam, and the streets grow quieter except for the occasional clop of a late cart or the barking of dogs. With the sun gone, the smells of the town shift. The heat of the day, which stirred up the sharper odors of waste, sweat, and fish, begins to fade. Cooler air sinks through the narrow streets, carrying softer scents. Smoke from dozens of hearths fills the alleys as families cook their evening meals. Stews of cabbage, onions, or barley, sometimes flavored with garlic or pepper if they could afford it. By twilight, another aroma drifts through the streets. By the day's bread ovens are cooling, and bakers toss their spent cinnamon sticks or nutmeg husks into the embers. Merchants might burn leftover herbs to keep insects away, and the wealthier homes burn incense or spice-laced wood shavings to purify the night air. Why cinnamon? Cinnamon wasn't common for the poor, but small amounts were often burned in religious rituals or during evening meals in prosperous households. Spices were believed to improve the air and even the soul. Combined with the smoky air and the lingering sweetness of dried fruit from the day's markets, it created a strange, comforting perfume, half forest fire, half bakery. The scent of cinnamon in the evening wasn't strong, and it wouldn't last long, but for a few minutes. As the smoke drifted low and the torches flickered, the street might smell faintly sweet. If you were a sleepy traveler walking the cobbled roads, you might think the whole town was tucking itself into bed under a blanket of spice and wood smoke. At full night, the town goes dark. Curfews were common, lanterns were few. The world becomes mostly sound and smell. The stables exhale warm animal-scented air. The river gurgles faintly in the distance, carrying away the day's waste. From time to time, a gust of wind carries The last whisper of cinnamon from a burned pomander or an extinguished kitchen fire. For the medieval townsfolk, this is a familiar, comforting smell. For us, it is history's lullaby, a faint reminder of life lived close to earth, fire and spice. And so, by nightfall, the cycle of scent begins again, waiting for the first baker's fire to bring cinnamon back to the dawn. The town sleeps now. The last footsteps have faded. Cats slink across empty courtyards, tails brushing the stones. Far off, a bell chimes softly, counting the hours for no one in particular. The air is cool, soft, and still except for the smallest swirl of smoke from a dying fire, carrying the ghost of cinnamon through the dark. If you wandered those cobbled streets tonight, you would hear your own heartbeat louder than the world around you. You might pass a shuttered bakery and catch the faintest, fading warmth of spice. It would cling to your memory like a half-forgotten dream. Somewhere, in the dim light of a single candle, a scribe leans over a wooden desk. He writes about trade, or weather, or nothing at all, just words to mark the passing of time. And in the silence the town sleeps on, wrapped in its quilt of wood smoke, river mist, and the last breath of cinnamon. Tomorrow, the cycle begins again, and for now, so can you. Not all bridges are heroic. Some do not leap across canyons or glitter with iron and light. Some bridges simply exist. There is one in a quiet village in northern France. It is short, only 3 planks across a trickle of a stream. The stream itself seems half asleep, murmuring politely as it winds under the bridge. No one writes songs about this bridge. It has never hosted a duel or a kiss at sunset. Its proudest moment might have been last spring when a family of ducks waddled across it, quacking softly, as if to check that the bridge was still there. It was. In England, there is a bridge so small that it barely notices the sheep trotting over it. The stones are worn smooth, and in winter a thin lace of moss grows between the cracks. Travelers rarely stop here. They cross without thinking, leaving only a whisper of footsteps and the faintest ripple in the water below. Perhaps the most peaceful bridge of all lies in a Japanese garden, where no one hurries. It arches slightly, just enough to reflect itself in the pond. Carp drift lazily beneath it, like slow-moving clouds, and maple leaves land on its wooden railings before the wind sighs them away. If you listen closely, you can hear nothing at all. These bridges have no grand tales to tell, but they do not mind. Their purpose is not to be remembered, it is simply to be silent, steady, waiting for a soft footstep, a wandering animal, or a drifting leaf. If you ever find one of these sleepy bridges, you might pause without meaning to. The world will feel quieter, time will feel slower, and you may find yourself, for just a moment, as still and peaceful as the bridge itself. Long ago, in the year 1374, a black and white cat named Pip wandered into a university town. He had no great ambitions, only a nose for warm bread and sunny windowsills. Pip's first lecture was unintentional. He followed the scent of roasted pigeon into a hall where students sat hunched over wooden desks. A professor, draped in a heavy robe, paced back and forth, speaking in Latin about Aristotle. Pip didn't understand a word, but the sunbeam falling across the floor seemed like a perfect place to nap. At first, no one noticed him. Then the students began whispering. "Is that a cat?" Pip opened one lazy eye, flicked his tail, and returned to sleep. The next day, Pip returned, not for the philosophy but because someone had dropped a piece of cheese in the hall. The students started leaving small treats for him, hoping for good luck before exams. Pip became a silent member of the class, his attendance more regular than half the students. Before long, the professors began to joke about him. "If the cat understands the lesson," one said, "then surely you can too." When graduation day came, the students secretly tied a tiny scrap of parchment around Pip's neck, declaring him Majesta Felinis Mastercat. He didn't attend the ceremony, of course. He was asleep on a pile of warm manuscripts, but his presence had made the cold stone halls feel a little more like home. To this day, some say that on quiet afternoons, a cat-shaped shadow curls up on the sunlit floor of the old lecture hall. Perhaps Pip is still attending, in his own drowsy way, at the edge of a quiet town. Hidden behind ivy and a rusted gate, stood an abandoned library. Its windows were clouded with dust, and its doors had not been opened in decades. Most people in the town had forgotten it even existed, but sometimes, on very still nights, the faintest whispers could be heard from inside. One evening, a girl named Ellen, who loved stories more than anything, followed the whispers. She pushed the creaky door open, and a soft sigh of air brushed past her, carrying the scent of old paper and candle wax. Inside, the library was enormous. Shelves reached all the way to the ceiling, ladders leaned at impossible angles, and books were stacked like little cities. But the strange thing was the whispers. Ellen crept closer, and then she realized the books were talking. They didn't speak loudly. They murmured in papery voices, as if afraid to wake the dust. Each book whispered its own story, but only a little bit, like it was inviting her to open it and hear the rest. She spent the whole night wandering from shelf to shelf, gently touching the spines. Whenever her fingers brushed a book, it would sigh and whisper, "Here, listen, remember me." Ellen visited the library every night after that. She became the quiet keeper of its secrets, reading to the books as much as they read to her, and though the rest of the town slept unaware, the forgotten library was no longer lonely. Some say, if you stand outside that old building on a windless night, you might hear it too. 1,000 soft voices, weaving stories into the dark dot in a small village where the river curved like a silver ribbon. There lived an old clockmaker named Bram. His workshop was filled with the ticking of dozens of clocks, grand clocks, pocket watches, and delicate cuckoos, but Bram himself was always quiet. He loved making clocks, but lately he had noticed something strange. The birds in the village seemed confused. They sang at odd hours, flew in restless loops, and sometimes perched on his window, tilting their heads at his ticking machines as if asking a question. One evening, while polishing the hands of a golden clock, Bram whispered to himself, perhaps the birds have lost their time, so he decided to help. Bram spent weeks creating a very special clock, one that would tell time not for humans but for birds. Instead of numbers, it had little branches and tiny silver leaves. Instead of chimes, it sang gentle bird calls. And when the dawn came, it glowed like sunlight breaking through the trees. When he finally hung the clock in the tallest oak by the river, something magical happened. The next morning, the first robin sang right as the clock's silver leaf turned. Sparrows and finches joined in, and soon the air was filled with a perfectly timed morning chorus. At dusk, the clock hummed a low lullaby, and the birds quietly fluttered to their nests, as if the sky itself had told them it was time to rest. From that day on, Bram became the village's keeper of feathered time. People still came to him for watches and clocks, but every bird for miles followed his gentle hours. And sometimes, if you walked by the river at sunset, you might see him sitting beneath the oak, smiling, as time softly unfolded for wings and sky dot in a quiet fishing town by the sea. There lived a girl named Lyra who loved the night sky. Every evening she climbed the old lighthouse steps just to watch the moon rise over the black water. She believed the moon had secret sand that if she listened closely, it might whisper them to her. One night during the autumn festival, Lyra wandered to the edge of the pier carrying a paper lantern. She dipped it low toward the water, and that was when she saw it, a fragment of moonlight, small as a pebble, floating on the waves. She gasped and scooped it up. The moon fragment was cool in her hands, and it pulsed like a heartbeat. Not knowing what else to do, she tucked it into her lantern. Instantly, the paper lantern glowed with a soft silver light, brighter than any candle, as if the moon itself had followed her home. From that day on, Lyra's lantern never went out. Fishermen used it to find their way through fog. Children whispered wishes into it, claiming the moon listened. Even the stars seemed to shine a little closer when Lyra carried it through the streets. But one night, a great storm came. The waves rose high, and the wind howled like wolves. Lyra ran to the lighthouse, lantern clutched in her hands. She saw the moon above, pale and trembling, as if missing its lost piece. Understanding at last, Lyra climbed to the top of the lighthouse and lifted her lantern high into the night. A soft beam stretched from the lantern to the sky, and the moonlight fragment floated upward like a glowing feather, returning home. The storm calmed. The sea turned silver under the full unbroken moon, and though Lyra's lantern was dark from that night on, it was said that whenever she walked along the shore, the moon would bend a little lower, as if bowing to the girl who once kept a piece of its heart. Dot in the oldest corner of the city, down an alley no one swept, there stood a library that most people had forgotten. Its doors were heavy oak, carved with moons, stars, and strange letters no one could read. A brass sign on the door simply said, "Enter quietly." One rainy afternoon, a boy named Elliot wandered in. The city had been loud and gray all day, and he needed somewhere to hide. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of paper and rain. Bookshelves rose so high they seemed to touch the sky, but stranger still, the books breathed. Dot when Elliot pressed his ear to a spine, he swore he could hear a faint hum like a heartbeat or a whispering. Dream. Dot, an old librarian, appeared from behind a tower of books. Her eyes were the color of dust motes in sunlight. "You can hear them," she said with a smile. "They're dreaming books." "Dream?" Elliot asked. "Of course," the librarian replied. "They dream of the stories they hold, and the ones they haven't been told yet. If you listen long enough, they might even let you in." That night, Elliot stayed in the library. When the city outside slept, the library awoke. Books floated off the shelves like sleepy birds. Pages flipped on their own, and letters danced across the air like fireflies. One book drifted into Elliot's hands. He opened it and fell in, not into the pages, but into the story itself. He found himself walking across a desert of golden clocks, where shadows told time instead of the sun. Another book took him to an ocean made of mirrors, and he sailed across it on the back of a swan. Every night, Elliot returned to the library. He lived 1,000 lives in dreams spun from ink and paper. But the librarian always gave the same warning: be careful. Books love you, but if you stay too long, they may never let you wake. In a seaside town where the sun always set in colors too bright to name, there lived a reclusive painter called Marlowe. He painted every day in a little attic that faced the ocean, but no one ever saw his work. The townspeople said he was strange. He never came to the market, never spoke to sailors, and yet he always seemed to smell faintly of salt and storms. One evening, as the sun melted into gold and crimson, a young girl named Sarah climbed a hill to peek into his window. What she saw stole her breath on the canvas. The horizon itself was moving. Waves rolled, seagulls soared, clouds drifted lazily. It wasn't a painting. It was alive. Marlowe turned and saw her. "You shouldn't be here," he said. But there was no anger in his voice, only weariness. How can it move?" Sarah whispered. He sighed. "Because I painted it with the real horizon. I stole it." Sarah didn't understand until the next day, when the townspeople woke to a sky without a sunset. The sea stretched to gray infinity. The horizon was gone. Marlowe explained his secret. He had always feared that the horizon was leaving him, slipping further away with each passing day. So one night, he had taken his enchanted brushes and painted it into his canvas to keep forever. "But now," he said, "the world is emptier, and my painting is a cage." Sarah looked at the lonely, beautiful horizon trapped in the frame. She touched the glass, and for a moment, she felt the wind and salt spray on her face. "Maybe," she said, "you don't need to keep it to love it." That night, together, they carried the canvas to the edge of the sea. Marlowe dipped his brush into the dark water and sliced the air. The horizon leaped free, a line of gold and blue rushing across the ocean, returning to where it belonged. The next sunset was the most brilliant the town had ever seen, and though Marlowe's attic was now empty, he no longer painted to keep. The horizon he painted to remember it. In a small mountain village, where the nights were darker than ink, there was a girl named Leora who could not speak. Her voice had been stolen by a winter wind when she was a child, leaving her words trapped in her chest like birds in a cage. She spent her nights on the rooftops, watching the sky tremble with constellations. The stars seemed alive to her, as if they were whispering secrets only she could hear. One night, she found a quill lying in the snow, its feather glimmering faintly with silver light. When she picked it up, the stars above pulsed brighter, and she knew it belonged to them. She dipped the quill into the dark sky itself, and to her astonishment, it came away wet with starlight ink. When she wrote in the air, glowing words appeared, trailing light like shooting stars. She wrote her first word, "Hello." The word floated above the rooftops, drifting across the sleeping village like a firefly. From that night on, Leora wrote every evening. She wrote poems on the wind that the trees recited in the morning. She wrote dreams that visited the villagers as they slept. She even wrote a song, and the river hummed it softly as it passed through the valley. The villagers never saw her writing, but they always woke to a world slightly more magical than the day before. One evening, a lonely boy who had just moved to the village climbed the roof to see where the strange light came from. He watched as Leora wrote his name in starlight, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Leora reached out and wrote a question. "Do you want to talk?" The boy whispered, "Yes." And so, under the endless sky, Leora found her voice not in sound, but in the language of stars. At the center of an old city, hidden between two silent streets, stood a library that few remembered. Its doors were always open, but dust covered the floor, and the air smelled faintly of forgotten rain. What no one knew was that the library could dream. At night, when the city slept, the shelves sighed softly, and the books whispered to one another, "Do you think someone will read us tomorrow?" Sometimes, the library dreamed of the people who had once visited, children running through its halls, students falling asleep over pages, old poets leaving notes in the margins. The library missed them. One winter night, a girl named Amina found the library by accident, chasing a stray cat through the alleyways. She stepped inside, and the air stirred like a held breath. The library recognized her, not because she had visited before, but because it had dreamed of her. A single book slid off a shelf and landed at her feet. Its title was The Girl Who Found a Lost Library. Amina opened it and saw something astonishing. The first page described her, standing exactly where she was now. The next page described her picking up the book, and the page after that told her what she would do next. Walk deeper into the library. She hesitated, but curiosity won. Every step she took, the book wrote itself ahead of her, guiding her to a secret room at the very center of the library. Inside was a single, golden chair. When she sat down, she heard thousands of whispers. "Thank you for coming back to us." The books had been waiting for a reader to awaken them, and that night, for the first time in decades, the library dreamed of tomorrow because it knew someone would return. In a quiet village where the streets curled like question marks, there lived an old clockmaker named Aurelio. He could fix any clock, from towering grandfather clocks to tiny pocket watches that trembled in his palm. But there was one clock he had never been able to repair: his own heart. Aurelio's heart ticked unevenly like a pendulum that had lost its rhythm. Doctors said he should rest, but Aurelio only smiled and said, "If I can fix every clock in the world, perhaps one day I will find the one that will fix me." He spent his days in his workshop, surrounded by ticking, chiming, and worry. At night, when the village slept, he listened to the symphony of time and imagined his heart as just another gear that needed the right touch. One evening, a young woman named Leora entered his shop carrying a broken music box. It used to belong to my grandmother, she said. When it played, it sounded like a heartbeat. Aurelio opened it carefully. Inside was a mechanism so delicate it almost looked alive. As he worked, Leora watched the flicker of lamplight on the rows of clocks, all ticking in harmony, except for the faint, irregular beat of Aurelio's heart. After hours of careful work, the music box began to play. A soft, steady thump-thump filled the room. Aurelio felt his own heart shiver, and then, impossibly, it began to match the music's rhythm. For the first time in years, he felt strong, steady, whole. Leora returned often after that, bringing broken watches and stories, and every time the music box played, Aurelio's heart joined the orchestra of time. Some nights, the villagers swore they could hear a new clock in the village, one that ticked with love, strong and true. In a fishing village that never saw the sun, a boy named Kale discovered a peculiar talent. He could catch shadows, not just the ones on the walls or under the boats, but the shadows that slipped off people when they weren't looking. The heavy, sad ones that followed them like rain. Kale used empty glass bottles to keep them. Each shadow swirled like smoke inside, making the glass cold to the touch. The villagers feared him at first. They whispered, "He steals pieces of your soul." But they didn't understand Kale was trying to help. When a fisherman returned from sea with grief in his eyes, Kale quietly bottled the shadow at his feet. When an old woman wept on her doorstep, he caught the darkness that clung to her hands one by one. The village grew lighter, but shadows are not meant to be caged. One night, during the blackest storm the village had ever seen, the bottles began to rattle, the wind howled, and every shadow Kale had captured escaped into the sky. The storm became alive with darkness, forming enormous wings that blotted out the moon. Terrified, Kale climbed to the cliff's edge and shouted into the wind, "I only wanted to help." The shadows paused, hovering over the sea. Then, gently, they rained down on the village once more, but softer, like the cool shade of clouds on a summer day. Kale realized something then. Shadows were not curses. They were protection, and sometimes people just needed help carrying them until they could bear the weight themselves. From that night on, the villagers no longer feared Kale. Instead, they left little glass bottles by his door as a way of saying thank you, not for stealing their shadows, but for keeping them safe until the light returned. On the heart of an abandoned city, there was a train station where no trains came. The tracks were polished and gleaming, yet they led into a tunnel of endless fog. Every night at 11:11 p.m., the station clock chimed softly, and a whistle echoed in the distance, but the train never arrived. Laura, a young woman who had inherited her grandmother's apartment near the station, was drawn to the sound. Each night she would wait on the platform, her breath mixing with the cold mist. One evening she heard footsteps beside her. An old man in a conductor's coat said, "You waiting for the 11:11? It never stops for the living." Startled, she asked, "Then, who is it for?" He smiled sadly. "Those who missed their last ride." Ilara noticed then figures standing in the fog across the tracks, transparent, patient, each holding a ticket that glimmered like starlight. On the 13th night, the whistle came closer than ever. The ground trembled, the fog split, and finally, the ghost train emerged. Its windows glowed with a warm golden light, filled with passengers whose faces were both sorrowful and serene. The conductor tipped his hat to Ilara. "Not your stop yet," he said, as the train passed through her like wind through silk and vanished into the night. From then on, Ilara no longer feared the station. She left flowers on the benches and whispered farewells to the fog, knowing the 11:11 train would always carry the lost home. In the heart of an abandoned city, there was a train station where no trains came. The tracks were polished and gleaming, yet they led into a tunnel of endless fog. Every night at 11:11 p.m., the station clock chimed softly, and a whistle echoed in the distance, but the train never arrived. Laura, a young woman who had inherited her grandmother's apartment near the station, was drawn to the sound. Each night she would wait on the platform, her breath mixing with the cold mist. One evening she heard footsteps beside her. An old man in a conductor's coat said, "Waiting for the 11:11? It never stops for the living." Startled, she asked, "Then, who is it for?" He smiled sadly. "Those who missed their last ride." Ilara noticed then figures standing in the fog across the tracks, transparent, patient, each holding a ticket that glimmered like starlight. On the 13th night, the whistle came closer than ever. The ground trembled, the fog split, and finally, the ghost train emerged. Its windows glowed with a warm golden light, filled with passengers whose faces were both sorrowful and serene. The conductor tipped his hat to Ilara. "Not your stop yet," he said, as the train passed through her like wind through silk and vanished into the night. From then on, Ilara no longer feared the station. She left flowers on the benches and whispered farewells to the fog, knowing the 11:11 train would always carry the lost home. The librarian of forgotten dreams at the edge of a city that no maps recorded stood a library with no doors. The windows were tall and arched, their glass fogged with the breath of ages. Inside, books whispered softly, as if reciting to each other the stories their owners had forgotten. No one ever saw the librarian enter or leave, but every night, the lantern in the highest tower flickered like a heartbeat. A girl named Sira found the library on a night when she couldn't sleep. She had been dreaming of her brother, who had left for the sea and never returned. As she circled the building, she whispered into the mist, "I wish I could see him again." A creak answered her. The wall in front of her shifted, and a narrow door appeared. Inside, the air smelled like rain on paper. Shelves rose higher than the stars, stacked with books of every shape and color. Behind a counter sat the librarian, a tall figure with silver hair, their eyes reflecting constellations. "Welcome, Sira," they said. "Your dream is waiting." The librarian handed her a book with her name embossed in gold. When Sira opened it, a wave of warmth washed over her, and she was standing on a moonlit beach. Her brother was there, smiling. His voice carried on the sound of waves. "I'm okay," he said. "I just wanted you to remember me with joy, not sorrow." When she blinked, she was back in the library, the book now closed in her hands. "Dreams fade if left alone," the librarian said gently, "but here, they are never lost." Sarah visited often after that, bringing her forgotten dreams to life between the pages of endless shelves. In a narrow alley of an old town, where the cobblestones remembered centuries, stood the shop of Elias Vey, the last clockmaker. Every wall inside was alive with ticking grandfather clocks, pocket watches, and tiny gears spinning like metallic raindrops. But there was one clock he never sold, a glass-domed piece with no hands. One evening, a boy entered the shop as the sun bled into dusk. "Mister," he asked, "why doesn't that clock tell time?" Elias smiled faintly, a sadness in his eyes. "It does, just not the time, you know." He lifted the dome. The clock began to hum, and the shop faded away. The boy found himself in a vast hall of moments. Thousands of floating gears turned silently, each one holding a memory, a first laugh, a last goodbye, a moment someone wished could last forever. "This is where lost hours go," Elias whispered, appearing beside him, "and mine is almost here." A silver gear floated toward Elias. He touched it, and suddenly he was young again, dancing with a girl beneath a festival lantern, her laughter ringing like chimes. "She was my only hour that mattered," he said. "I saved it for last." The boy watched as Elias faded, becoming part of the ticking light. The handless clock in the shop now bore a single silver hand, pointing to eternity. From that day, the boy visited often, learning to mend clocks, and perhaps to mend time itself. Every night, when the small town of Mero slept, Ivy climbed to the abandoned railway bridge that curved like a question mark into the sky. She had been told stories that if you waited long enough, you could hear a train whistle in the stars. One night, a silver mist rose from the valley below. Then, like a dream taking shape, rails appeared across the night sky, connecting constellations like dots in a notebook. A train emerged from the darkness, its cars glowed with windows of galaxies, and its wheels left trails of stardust smoke. It stood frozen as the train slowed, its doors opening with a hiss that smelled of cold night air and moonlight. "Are you boarding?" The conductor was a tall figure in a coat woven from fragments of nebulae. "Where does it go?" Ivy asked. "Everywhere you've ever dreamed." She stepped inside. Passengers filled the cars, a boy with a paper ship that sailed in zero gravity, an old woman holding the hands of her childhood self, a man asleep, dreaming of a city with crystal rivers. The train leaped between constellations, passing Saturn's rings, through clouds of comet ice that hummed like harps. At the final car, Ivy found a single empty seat facing the universe. The stars were so close she could almost touch them. "Will I come back?" she whispered. The conductor smiled. "Only if you wish. The train between stars runs on wonder, and yours will never run out." On the edge of the forgotten forest, there stood a crooked house that everyone in the village avoided. Its windows were clouded like old eyes. Its door hung slightly open as if waiting for someone to return. One autumn evening, Leah wandered off the path chasing a lantern bug. By the time she caught it, the sun had fallen, and the forest whispered like a sleeping beast. That's when she saw the house. It tilted under the weight of years, ivy crawling over its bones, yet its chimney smoked gently as if it had been expecting her. When Leah knocked, a door creaked open on its own. The air smelled of dust and cinnamon. Inside, furniture sat beneath white sheets, but the fireplace glowed warmly, and a kettle steamed though no one was there to pour it on the mantel. A clock ticked backward, and a photograph of a little girl smiled with eyes that looked just like Leah's. "You're late." A voice drifted from the top of the stairs. Leah froze. A small figure appeared, a child dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her feet never quite touching the floor. "I've been waiting forever," the ghost said softly. "Now that you're here, we can play." The house sighed with happiness, walls straightening just a little, as if it had been holding its breath for decades. From that night on, villagers said they sometimes heard children laughing deep in the forest, and the crooked house no longer felt so lonely in the heart of the old city. Where the streets twisted like scribbled lines, stood a building with no sign. Its door was always locked, except for those who had forgotten something important. One rainy evening, Elliot wandered the alleys, trying to remember what he had lost. He couldn't recall if it was an object, a memory, or perhaps a piece of himself. The door appeared before him with a golden key already in the lock. He turned it, and the scent of old paper and moonlight drifted out. Inside, the library stretched endlessly upward, shelves curling into spirals of stars and mist. Every book whispered softly, like a dream speaking in its sleep. A librarian with moth wings glided silently between aisles, carrying a candle that flickered with other people's memories. "Looking for what you lost?" she asked. Elliot nodded. The librarian handed him a book with a blank cover. He opened it, and there he was, 5 years old, building a paper kite with his father in a sunny field he had forgotten existed. "Dreams don't die here," the librarian said. "They just wait to be remembered." Elliot spent hours reading chapters of his own heart, until he felt whole again. When he left, the door vanished behind him, but that night, he dreamed in full color for the first time in years. At the end of Willow Street stood a little clock shop filled with the gentle ticking of hundreds of clocks. Its owner, Mr. Thorne, was the last clockmaker in town, a man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to measure time itself. Every clock in the shop was precise, but one clock was different. It sat on a dusty shelf in the back, its hands frozen at 1 minute to midnight. No matter how he wound it, it wouldn't move, and every time he tried, he felt a shiver crawl up his spine. One stormy evening, as lightning painted the sky white, the strange clock began to tick. Mr. Thorne stared in shock. Its hands crawled forward for the first time in 50 years. "Ah," he whispered. "So my hour has come." He locked the shop door and sat by the ticking clock, feeling the air grow thick and heavy at the stroke of midnight. The clocks all stopped, together, leaving the world in perfect silence. Then, softly, the bell above the door rang, but no wind had touched it. A shadowed figure entered, wearing a coat of darkness and starlight. "Your work is done," it said, its voice the echo of 1,000 ticking clocks. "Time has come to collect you." Mr. Thorne smiled, placing his tools neatly on the bench. "Then I suppose I won't be late." And when the figure took his hand, the frozen clock struck 1 and vanished from the shelf. There was a train station hidden deep in the fog at the edge of a sleepy harbor town. The locals called it Platform Zero, though no maps listed it, and no tickets were ever sold. Lena had heard the rumors all her life. A ghostly train passed through once each year, but no one ever saw it arrive. Curious and restless, she waited under the flickering lantern one autumn night, her breath curling like smoke in the mist. Just after midnight, a low hum rose from the tracks, a headlight pierced the fog, and a black steam train glided in, silent as a shadow, its windows glowing with a soft golden light. The doors hissed open, but not a single passenger stepped out. Lena climbed aboard. The train was filled with empty seats, but she felt eyes on her from the reflections in the windows. A conductor, pale as paper, tipped his cap. "Ticket?" he asked. I don't have one," Lena stammered. "Then this will be your first and last ride," he said, smiling like a memory. The train never stopped. At another station, it rode through misty mountains, forgotten cities, and starless skies. When Lena awoke, she was back at the harbor, alone on the platform, but in her hand was a ticket, stamped with a single word. There was a train station hidden deep in the fog, at the edge of a sleepy harbor town. The locals called it Platform Zero, though no maps listed it, and no tickets were ever sold. Lena had heard the rumors all her life. A ghostly train passed through once each year, but no one ever saw it arrive. Curious and restless, she waited under the flickering lantern one autumn night, her breath curling like smoke in the mist. Just after midnight, a low hum rose from the tracks, a headlight pierced the fog, and a black steam train glided in, silent as a shadow, its windows glowing with a soft golden light. The doors hissed open, but not a single passenger stepped out. Lena climbed aboard. The train was filled with empty seats, but she felt eyes on her from the reflections in the windows. A conductor, pale as paper, tipped his cap. "Ticket?" he asked. I don't have one," Lena stammered. "Then this will be your first and last ride," he said, smiling like a memory. The train never stopped at another station. It rode through misty mountains, forgotten cities, and starless skies. When Lena awoke, she was back at the harbor, alone on the platform, but in her hand was a ticket, stamped with a single word. Maps showed only a blank spot, and travelers passing through would later insist there was nothing there at all. Elias stumbled upon it by accident, his car breaking down on an endless country road. He walked until he found neat rows of cottages and a silent main street, where clocks all read 11:11. The townsfolk smiled politely but never answered questions. When Elias asked where he was, they would just say, "Home." Of course, he stayed the night at the inn, and in the morning his own name slipped from his mind. By the end of the week, Elias wore the same polite smile as the others. The town had a new resident, and no one outside would ever know. The house that waited miles from any major road, hidden behind overgrown pines and thick fog, stood a house that had not been touched in decades. Locals whispered about it. Some said it had been abandoned after a family vanished overnight. Others claimed the house moved on its own, appearing in different places along the desolate countryside. Most simply pretended it didn't exist. One autumn evening, a photographer named Claire decided to find it. She had a fascination with forgotten places. and a lead from an online forum sent her deep into the misty backroads. Her car's GPS lost signal, and the road grew narrow and cracked, swallowed by fallen leaves. When the house finally appeared, at the end of a dirt path, she felt a strange familiarity, like she had been dreaming of it for years. The house's windows were dark, yet she felt as though it was watching her. Boards covered the front door, but the moment she touched the handle, it swung open silently, as if the house had been waiting. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Her footsteps echoed in a way that didn't quite match the size of the rooms. Every wall was lined with framed photographs, but when she looked closer, the faces were all blurred except for one. It was her, a photograph of her, standing on the porch, camera in hand. Panic surged. She backed toward the door, but the house had shifted. The entrance now led into a narrow hallway, stretching far longer than the building should allow. The floorboards groaned as she ran, and behind her she heard the frames falling. One by one she finally burst through an exit and found herself on the road again. The house was gone, and her car sat right where she left it. When she returned home, her memory was hazy. Days later she developed the photos from her camera. Among the pictures of trees and fog, there was one she didn't take a photo of her back, standing at the threshold of the house, with the door slowly closing. The radio in the woods Eli liked. To hike alone. He found comfort in the quiet of the forest, where the only sounds were wind and birds and the crunch of his boots against leaves. One weekend, he decided to take a new trail through a state forest he had never explored. It was late autumn, and the sky had that faded gray color that makes the day feel shorter than it is. About an hour in, he noticed something strange, a crackling sound, faint but constant, like a radio picking up static. At first, he thought it was wind through the trees, but the deeper he went, the clearer the sound became. A radio, definitely, tuned just between stations. He followed the noise until he found it, a small old transistor radio, rusted and weathered, sitting on a moss tree stump. No one was around, no campsites nearby. No trails branching here. He crouched, picking it up. It was ice cold to the touch, yet it had no batteries. The static shifted. Through the crackle came a faint voice. "Hello," Eli froze. It sounded like his own voice. Thinking he imagined it, he set the radio back down and backed away. But as he walked, the static followed him, soft at first, then louder, until he realized he was hearing it from the trees. He turned his phone on to check for service. No bars, no GPS, just a black screen for a moment. Then his reflection, blurry and smiling, even though his real face wasn't. The forest grew unfamiliar. He was sure he had taken a straight path, but the trees were different now, closer together, darker, their branches twisting like ribs overhead. Then he heard the radio again right behind him. He spun around. The radio sat on the ground, just a few feet away, even though he had left it far behind. The static hissed. Then a voice emerged clearer this time. "Why did you leave me here?" It was his own voice again, but layered, distorted, as if more than one version of him was speaking at once. He ran the forest, shifted and bent, paths looping back into themselves. Every time he thought he found the trail, the radio would appear, sometimes perched on a rock, sometimes dangling from a tree branch by its frayed antenna, always watching. The static never stopped, and the voice grew more urgent. Come back, you're not done." By the time night fell, Eli stumbled into a clearing he didn't recognize from the center. Dozens of radios sat in a perfect circle, all rusted, all buzzing softly. As he approached, each one lit up with a red dial, and he heard himself speaking in hundreds of echoes. "I never left." 2 weeks later, hikers reported finding Eli's phone lying on a stump in the forest. The video on it was strange. It showed Eli walking in circles through the woods, smiling at the camera, while a soft static hummed in the background. The screen would flicker every few seconds, and for a frame or two, there was someone standing behind him holding a radio. The bus dropped Mara off just past sunset, the last stop. A lonely patch of road between endless pine trees and black marshland. Her aunt's house stood in the distance, a tilted wooden structure half buried in dead leaves. The windows reflected nothing, just flat black mirrors. Mara dragged her suitcase down the gravel path. She had been here once as a child, and even then, she remembered thinking the house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old smoke. Everything was still, except for the faint hiss of static coming from a room at the end of the hall. She followed the sound. On a dusty desk in a back room, an antique radio whispered. Its dial glowed red, and the voice of some long-dead announcer spoke in half-sentences. "Nightfall must stay. Signal is." Then a sharp crack, then silence. Mara frowned. Her aunt had told her the house was empty, no power, no phone service, and yet the radio worked. She turned to leave the room, and for a second, she saw someone in the window, a man, standing in the tree line, watching. But when she blinked, he was gone that night. She slept in the upstairs guest room, wrapped in musty blankets. Sometime after midnight, she woke to the radio turning on by itself. "You're not alone." The voice was almost a whisper, but too close. Like someone was speaking directly into her ear. She sat up. The room was dark, except for the faint glow from the radio downstairs. Then she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, on the roof. In the morning, she found pine needles scattered across the floor of the upstairs hallway, even though all the windows were closed. When she checked the radio, it was silent again. But the dial had moved, as if someone had been tuning it in the night. That evening, as the forest went dark, the radio spoke again. This time the voice was clearer. Do not leave the house tonight. By the second night, Mara had convinced herself that the first night's fear was just her imagination. The house was old. Old houses make noise. But as the sun went down, the pines outside swallowed the last light. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if listening. She sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the radio hum on the desk. The red dial flickered faintly. Then, at exactly 9:17 p.m., a voice crackled through the static. Mara, her stomach turned cold. She hadn't told anyone she was here, not even her friends. The only person who knew was her aunt. The voice continued, "They are walking now. Do not look out the window." Mara froze. Her eyes drifted toward the nearest window, but something in her guts screamed not to instead. She sat in silence, heart pounding, as the sound of footsteps began on the porch outside. Slow, measured. Someone or something was circling the house. The steps stopped by the window behind her. She could feel the presence there, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against the glass. The radio hissed, "Do not move." Mara sat perfectly still. Outside she heard a low wet breathing, and the faint scrape of claws dragging across the wood. Then 3 knocks on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Her blood turned to ice when the noises finally faded. She didn't dare check the window. Instead, she crept upstairs, carrying the radio with her. Around 3 a.m., she woke to a sound, not footsteps this time, but whispering, not from the radio. From the forest, through the cracks in the shutters, she saw faint lights moving between the trees, like lanterns, but swaying too fast. Almost floating. Then the radio came alive again. Do not follow the lights. By the time dawn came, Mara hadn't slept. She checked the outside of the house. Across the siding, just below the window, where she'd sat, were 3 long scratches, each one bleeding sap as if the tree line itself had reached for her. Mara lasted only 1 more day inside the cabin. By sunset her nerves were splintering. The whispers from the forest were louder now, almost words, though she couldn't understand them. And then, at 9:17 p.m., the radio clicked on again. "You must come out now." The voice was calmer than before, almost inviting. "If you stay inside, they will come in." Mara's hands trembled on the doorknob. Through the thin wood, she heard the forest breathing. Not wind, not animals, breathing. She stepped outside. The night air was heavy and damp. The forest stretched endlessly in front of her, each tree a black spire against the starless sky. Then she saw them, the lights. Dozens now, drifting through the pines like willow wisps. They were moving closer. The radio hissed in her hand. "Walk, but do not speak." Mara's bare feet crunched against dead needles and wet earth. The forest smelled like moss and decay. Behind her, the cabin lights faded into the dark. Ahead, the lights drew her deeper into the hollow heart of the woods. That she moved, she began to see shapes among the trees. Pale, thin figures. They walked like humans, but too tall, their joints bending wrong in the shadows. Some of them carried the floating lights, others simply watched. The radio crackled again. "Do not look up." Of course, Mara looked up. High in the pines, something enormous was moving. Its limbs stretched across the treetops, like a spider made of shadow and wood. Its head, or what she thought was its head, was a hollow circle, as if a face had been erased. And then she realized the whispering was coming from above. Suddenly, the forest lights went out, all at once. Only the static radio lit her path with its faint red glow. Then the voice said, "Run." Mara didn't think. She ran. The forest floor was a blur beneath her feet, roots clawing at her ankles, branches whipping her face. The radio hissed in her hand, spitting bursts of static like a heartbeat. Behind her something moved, fast, silent at first, then a wet, dragging sound like branches sliding over skin. She didn't dare look back. The trees began to thin, and through them she saw a light, not the floating ghostly ones. This was the yellow glow of street lamps. A road. Mara burst out of the tree line, her chest burning, lungs tearing for air. A single car's headlights appeared in the distance. She stumbled toward the road, waving her arms wildly. The car slowed and then stopped. The driver rolled down the window, an older man with deep lines in his face. "You came from there." He pointed into the black wall of pines. Mara nodded, shivering, unable to speak. The man's face went pale. "Get in, quickly." As the car pulled away, Mara looked out the back window. The forest was utterly dark, but for a second, she thought she saw something huge standing among the trees, a hollow ring where a face should be. The radio in her lap, she'd never let it go, crackled softly. "You ran this time." Then silence. Alternate fate. If she hadn't run, if Mara had frozen instead, if she had done nothing but stare into the blackness, the figures would have surrounded her. Their tall, thin bodies would have blocked out the path behind and above. The hollow face would lower, its whispers sliding directly into her head. "You are one of us now." The radio would go silent, and Mara would walk into the dark without resistance. By morning the cabin would be empty, and anyone passing through would hear only the faint static of a radio coming from the pines. Mara didn't sleep that night. The old man dropped her off at a roadside motel, said nothing more than, "Don't go back there." But the radio, she couldn't turn it off. Static hissed in the darkness, filling the tiny room like a pulse. Then a voice. "Do you hear us, Mara?" Sheet. "For as you can't run forever." The static thickened, swelling into shapes she could feel behind her eyes. Images flickered in her mind. The cabin, the pines, the hollow face bending down to the treetops. "You're still tuned in." Mara tried to unplug the radio, but there was no cord. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the motel's TV flickered on by itself. Black and white snow, lines crawling across the screen. A figure appeared, not on the TV, but in the static itself, like it was looking through another world. It had no face, only a perfectly round void, and yet she felt it staring at her. "You ran from the woods, but the signal travels." Her phone buzzed. The motel's clock radio turned itself on. Even the ceiling fan began to hum with static. "And now you are part of it." Suddenly, Mara realized the hollow signal wasn't trapped in the forest. It followed frequencies, radios, TVs, Wi-Fi, anything that could carry a broadcast, and the more you listened, the closer it came. By dawn, Mara had made a decision: either destroy the radio, or follow the broadcast to its source, because the voice wasn't finished. It had one final whisper: "If you want this to end, come to where we began." The sun was weak, barely rising over the pines, when Mara drove back toward the mountains. Didn't know why she obeyed the voice. Maybe curiosity, maybe desperation, or maybe because some part of her was already tuned in. The old logging road twisted like a spine, each turn leading deeper into silent forest. No birds, no wind, only the faint, unrelenting hiss of the radio on her passenger seat. At mile marker 13, the static sharpened into words. "Almost there." The trees parted into a clearing. In the center stood a rusted transmission tower, leaning slightly, its dish pointed toward a sky that seemed a shade too dark for morning. The air felt thick, like stepping into another frequency. Mara approached the tower. Every step made the static grow clearer, turning into overlapping whispers. "Mara, receiver, signal." Her chest tightened. The void-faced figure waited at the base of the tower, half faded into the air like a bad TV reception. "You came," it said without a mouth. "What are you?" Mara whispered. The figure tilted its hollow face, and suddenly, she saw flashes, memories that weren't hers. Families in 1970s living rooms, staring at their TVs, frozen in horror. Campers in the 90s, huddled around radios that wouldn't shut off. A satellite dish in the woods, transmitting something it wasn't supposed to. "We're the broadcaster," voice said. Now all around her, echoing in the metal tower, in the ground, inside her skull. "Every receiver is a door." The tower groaned, and the static poured down like rain, swallowing the clearing in white noise. Through the blur, Mara saw dozens of hollow-faced figures, all walking toward her from the edges of the forest. She realized, with sudden cold clarity, she hadn't just found the signal, she had joined it. The white noise devoured the clearing. Mara covered her ears, but it was inside her now, a vibrating pressure in her bones, like her skull was a radio antenna. The hollow figures closed in, moving with jerky flickers as if the world was skipping frames. "You are tuned," the voices whispered in unison. Mara stumbled backward until her hand touched cold metal at the base of the transmission tower. Her reflection shimmered in the steel, but her face looked wrong. The eyes were black voids, and her mouth moved on its own. "Receiver online." Panic. She grabbed the portable radio and twisted the dial. Through the static, another signal bled through a different voice. "If you can hear this, run." Her pulse hammered. The broadcast was not one thing. There were other signals, fighting to get through. The hollow figures froze. Static screeched like the tower itself was angry. Then, the forest distorted. The trees stretched like melted shadows, the sky glitched in pixelated ripples, and the tower's dish began to rotate toward her. She realized the awful truth. The signal wasn't just broadcasting, it was pulling her in. Mara had two choices: drop the radio and run, risking the forest swallowing her whole, climb the tower, and find the source of the original transmission, may be the only way to break free. She gritted her teeth, grabbed the ladder, and began to climb. With every rung, the world below faded into fuzzy black and white, like an old VHS tape wearing out. At the top, a hatch led into the satellite dish. It was humming like a heart beating in metal. Mara took a breath, then crawled inside. The world inverted, light became darkness, and the forest below vanished. She was falling, not through space, but through frequencies. A tunnel of sound and ghostly images, faces screaming, hands reaching, numbers repeating endlessly. 313, 313, 313. She hit the ground hard, except it wasn't ground. She was now standing in a suburban street, frozen in time. Houses flickered like holograms, a TV glow pulsed in every window, a world inside the broadcast. Mara staggered to her feet, The suburban street stretched infinitely in both directions, bathed in the pale blue of endless TV static. Every house looked the same, white siding, black roof, curtains drawn tight. Except from every window, faces pressed against the glass. Silent, watching. A low hum vibrated through the air. She realized it wasn't the wind, it was the sound of electricity, buzzing like a swarm of cicadas. Then, a front door creaked open. A man stepped out, or what looked like a man. His skin was gray, and his mouth was locked in a frozen, polite smile. "Welcome home," he said in a voice that echoed like a broken radio. Mara backed away. The man's head twitched. His eyes were TV screens, flickering, with black and white static. Suddenly, all the doors on the street opened. Dozens of figures poured out, men, women, children, all smiling, all with flickering screens for eyes. "Welcome home," they chanted in unison. Mara ran, her footsteps slapped against the street, but the road beneath her glitched, stretching and looping, like she was running in an endless tape loop. A voice boomed from the sky, deep and mechanical. "You are tuned to channel 0. Lightning of static crackled overhead. When Mara glanced back, the neighbors were crawling after her on all fours. Faces upside down, bodies bending in ways that should break bones. She dove between two houses and crashed through a wooden fence, only to land in another street, identical to the first, except this one had a playground. On the swings, children sat perfectly still, facing away from her. The carousel began to spin on its own. The chains on the swings creaked. A whisper rose in the air. 313, 313, 313. She was trapped no matter which way she ran. The neighborhood repeated. Every corner turned back to the same street. Then Mara saw it, a flickering antenna tower in the distance, but upside down like a reflection in water. She understood if she could reach that inverted tower, she might find the exit as she sprinted. Toward it, the world began to tilt. Houses sliding off the street and floating into the static sky. The smiling neighbors were everywhere now, crawling from rooftops, emerging from TV screens, their voices overlapping. "Stay tuned forever." Mara tripped and fell. A hand grabbed her ankle. She screamed, but when she looked down, the hand was hers. Her reflection in a puddle of static smiled up at her. Mara's reflection gripped her ankle, its fingers cold as dead glass. She kicked, but the puddle of static rippled and swallowed her leg up to the knee. Her reflection grinned wider, teeth like shattered screen glass. "You can't run from the broadcast," it whispered in her own voice. The world around her bent, houses folding inward, streets stretching like melted tape. Somewhere far above, the antenna tower hummed. Its inverted peak pulsed with a heartbeat of static. She realized, with a creeping dread, that the sound had been there all along. The hum was in her chest now. The smiling neighbors surrounded her, forming a perfect circle. Some stood, some crawled, some floated, their mouths opened in unison. From the voids inside, TV snow poured out, filling the air like fog. "We see you, we hear you, we are you." Mara ripped her leg free and ran again, heart hammering toward the inverted tower. The ground fractured beneath her, revealing endless layers of the same neighborhood stacked like channels on an old TV. She was falling through static, dropping from one street to the next, and the next, as if flipping through a nightmare broadcast. Then she landed hard on her side. She was in front of the tower now. Its base was a giant screen, and on it played her face. She watched herself stumble, run, scream, from every angle, over and over. It wasn't recording her, it was playing her life on repeat. "Why me?" she screamed, voice echoing in the electric void. The tower answered. "You tuned in." Her body convulsed as the neighbors closed in, touching her shoulders, her face, her heart. Every screen in their eyes flickered to the same image, Mara's face smiling, and then she understood. The hollow signal didn't just broadcast it, replaced. The last thing Mara saw was her own face on the tower, smiling as it said in a chorus of voices, "Stay tuned, forever." The screen went dark. For a long, endless moment, there was only static and silence. Then, somewhere in the city miles away, a lonely television in a pawn shop window flickered on by itself. On the screen, a familiar face appeared. Mara smiled. The pawn shop owner, an old man named Calder, stared at the TV in confusion. He hadn't touched the remote. Must be a signal test. He tapped the glass. Mara's smile widened. "Hello," he muttered. Mara's voice came from every TV in the shop. "Hello, Calder." He froze. The TVs weren't connected to any cable. Some were broken and unplugged, and yet, one by one, every screen in the shop flickered to life with her face. Some smiling, some frowning, some screaming without sound. "What the hell is this?" Calder staggered back, knocking over a box of dusty VHS tapes. The static thickened in the air, swirling like smoke, and a hum vibrated in his teeth. The TVs spoke again, in perfect unison. "We see you, we hear you, we are coming." Calder ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, but the glass of the window had become a screen. And there he was, from above. Captured in grainy black and white, a camera that didn't exist was watching him across the city. More screens flickered on, phones, billboards, hospital monitors, baby monitors, all showing Mara's face. Some laughing, some crying, some whispering. Stay tuned. That night, the city went dark. Only the screens glowed, casting the streets in pale, cold light. People stood in their homes, mouths open, eyes blank, watching themselves appear on screens they didn't know were on. The hollow signal was no longer contained. It lived in every reflection, every device, every shadow of a signal, and those who watched would soon join the broadcast. By dawn, the city was silent. No cars, no voices. Only the faint hiss of static dot streetlights flickered in the early fog. Every billboard, every phone, every screen glowed with the same image. Mara's face. She didn't smile now. She watched, eyes wide, unblinking. Every screen, a window into something. Deeper. Police radios crackled with broken whispers. Dispatch, foreseeing ourselves. Unit 12. Do you copy? There's a man in the static. Then the voice returned, but it wasn't the officers anymore. We see you, we hear you. By mid-morning, half the city's residents were gone. Their clothes and phones lay where they had stood, as if they had melted into the air. On nearby screens, their faces now appeared, looping endlessly, some crying, some laughing, some reaching out as if pounding against glass. A drone flew over the empty streets, broadcasting the footage live. Its feed went viral in minutes, but those who watched vanished next. Their laptops fell silent. Phones clattered to the floor. Only Mara's face remained, smiling faintly in the glow. By nightfall, the entire city had become a ghost broadcast. Towers hummed, street cameras panned by themselves. The static fog rolled outward, reaching the suburbs, the highways, the world. Beyond. In a dark living room hundreds of miles away, a child watched the news report on an old TV. Mom, he whispered. The reporter stared straight at him now, through the glass. We see you. The signal was spreading, and there would be no turning it off. It began with cities, then towns, then remote villages with no electricity, where old, dusty radios crackled to life on their own. The hollow signal was no longer local. It was everywhere. Satellites orbiting Earth picked up a transmission that wasn't coming from Earth at all. It looped endlessly, a low digital hum beneath static, punctuated by a single phrase. We see you. In London, the giant screen at Piccadilly. Circus flashed white. Then Mara's face appeared, but behind her, millions of other faces shifted like a living collage. In Tokyo, train station announcements were replaced by whispers in perfect Japanese. Stay tuned. In New York, Times Square became a sea of blank-eyed tourists, their own images looping on every advertisement. Airplanes reported strange occurrences. Pilots saw static clouds on their radar, shapes moving against the wind. Passengers vanished, mid-flight, leaving only seatbelts fastened on seatback screens. Their faces appeared, eyes wide, mouths moving soundlessly. Governments tried to shut it down. They cut power to cities. They shut down satellites. They burned communication towers. None of it worked. The hollow signal didn't need wires anymore. It was in the air, hiding in light, riding the reflection of every lens and glass surface. By the end of the month, half the planet was empty. The other half was watching itself disappear in a research bunker deep underground. The last scientists argued it's not a virus, it's a migration, Dr. Lian whispered, her face lit by a single laptop. Migration to where? Another demanded. Before she could answer, the screen went white. Mara smiled. Here, the final broadcast was seen by no one because by the time the last camera went dark, we were all inside the signal. There was no pain, no light, no sound, only falling. When my eyes opened, I was standing in a city I recognized, but it was wrong. The streets were clean, empty, skies as every building was made of screens. And on every screen was me, hundreds of me, at different angles, looping gestures I didn't remember making. I walked my footsteps making no sound. Around the corner I saw others, neighbors, strangers, faces from the news, all wandering aimlessly, mouthing silent screams. When they noticed me, they froze. Then, one by one, they lifted their hands and pointed to the sky. I followed their gaze. There was no sun, no stars, only a giant, circular screen, filling the entire sky with static dot, and in the static, a shape moved, a figure. It leaned closer, pressing its pale face to the glassy surface of the world. Mara, welcome. Her voice vibrated inside my head. You are part of us now. I tried to speak, but my mouth made no sound. Do you want to see what's next? She asked. Around me, the silent crowd nodded. Some fell to their knees, some cried. The ground began to shift, and the city of screens peeled away, like paper in the wind. Beneath it was nothing, no color, no space, only signal rippling like liquid light. We fell again. When I opened my eyes this time, I wasn't me anymore. I was everyone. I saw through 1,000 eyes at once, every memory overlapping, every fear amplified, and in that endless chorus of thought, one voice rose above all the rest. We are not watching anymore. We are the broadcast. I drifted in the endless signal, the static flowing through me like a river of fragmented memories. Every thought felt borrowed. Every image was someone else's life bleeding into mine. I could no longer tell where I ended and they began. Then the static parted, and a corridor appeared, a hall of mirrors. stretching forever. But these weren't normal mirrors. Each pane reflected a moment. Childhood bedrooms, hospital rooms, empty apartments, graveyards at night. Every frame was a broadcast, streaming real lives to an unseen audience. Mara emerged from the static, her body flickering like corrupted video. "Do you see now?" she whispered. "The world outside thinks it is real, but it has always been content." She reached out her hand. "Come, you must choose your channel." I followed her down the corridor. As I passed each mirror, I felt myself splintering, drawn into every reflection. One mirror showed me sitting in my apartment, staring blankly at a dead TV screen. Another showed me wandering through this very static world, forever lost. Another, it showed nothing at all, just a black screen with a blinking live icon in the corner. "What happens if I pick the black one?" I asked. Mara smiled. "Then you leave the broadcast, but you will not return." "And the others?" She gestured to the crowd of silent figures emerging from the static, their eyes white and empty. They refused to choose, so they became part of the feed. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the signal around us. The static thrashed, and a low voice boomed through every channel. "Transmission error. Excess viewers detected." The mirrors began to shatter, one by one, erasing entire lives with every crack. Mara grabbed my hand, her grip like cold glass. "You have to choose now." The mirrors shattered around us, falling into the static like broken ice. Each fragment played a different life, flickering in and out. A child's birthday party, a man crying alone in his car, a woman staring at a laptop screen that showed me. The booming voice returned. "Transmission stability at risk. Non-participant detected." Mara's flickering form began to distort, like a video buffer choking on corrupted frames. "They've seen you now," she whispered, her voice layered in static. "You can't hide from the audience. Choose, or be deleted." I looked at the remaining mirrors. Only 2 were left unbroken. A familiar apartment mine where a version of me sat on the couch, remote in hand, staring at the static screen. A black mirror, no image, just a blinking red live indicator in the corner. "If I pick the apartment," I said, "I go back." "Yes," Mara said, "but you won't remember this. You'll wake up thinking it was just a dream, until the next signal calls you again." "And the black one," her smile glitched, splitting across her face. "Then you are gone from them forever. But you'll see what waits." Beyond the broadcast, the static roared. The voice screamed. "Final choice required. 5. FOUR. I stepped forward, my heart pounding, feeling the hum of a billion unseen eyes watching. 3. I raised my hand toward. I chose the black mirror. The void without an image, only the pulsing live light in the corner. As my fingers touched its surface, the glass rippled like water. The static around me screamed, and the booming voice howled. "Participant has chosen observation mode, exiting transmission." Then everything collapsed. I fell through endless channels flickering by old commercials I didn't remember. Cartoons from my childhood that never aired. Faces of strangers mouthing silent warnings. Each second felt like years until I landed on a cold metal floor. I was in a studio. The walls were lined with screens. Every screen was me, sitting in different rooms, living different lives, making different choices. Behind the cameras, rows of faceless operators with glowing static. Heads typed endlessly on machines. "Welcome," a voice whispered, echoing without a source. "You have left the audience and joined the archive." I saw Mara standing beside me, more real than she had ever been. "This is where they keep us," she said. "Every version of us that ever tuned in. They never wanted just one story. They wanted all of them." She turned to face a wall of screens. One by one, the versions of me looked up from their lives, their eyes wide, as if they finally felt me watching. "And now," I whispered. Mara smiled softly. "Now, we wait for the next signal, or we become it." In the far corner, a camera slowly turned toward me, its red live light blinking faster, and I realized I wasn't the audience anymore. I was the broadcast the camera hummed, its single red live eye pulsing like a heartbeat. I felt its gaze pulling at the edges of my existence, tearing me into fragments like pixels being rearranged. "Stay still," Mara warned. "Once it locks on, there's no going back." I wanted to speak, but the words glitched in my throat, coming out as bursts of static. "KKCHH-WH-WH-AM-I-KKCHHH." The camera absorbed the sound, and then I felt myself be ROADCASTAD. My mind exploded outward through a million invisible channels. I was in living rooms and bedrooms, on dusty televisions, on sleek glass phones, on ancient radios where only static used to live. I saw them. The watchers, they weren't people. Or maybe they had been, once. They were shapes made of frozen light, faces built from flickering frames of commercials, limbs stitched together from the shadows of long-forgotten late-night shows, and they were all leaning forward, hungry, as I spoke in their language of static and hum. One of them reached toward the screen, toward me, and when its finger touched the glass, I felt cold electricity run through my being. "We see you now," they whispered in a chorus of dead channels. "And now, you will see us." The studio melted away, and I was nowhere, or maybe everywhere. A landscape of floating screens stretched into an infinite black sky. Each screen showed a moment of my life, and each moment was watching me back. Mara appeared beside me again, but her form flickered like a bad VHS tracking line. "They've accepted you," she said. "The Watchers will make you one of their own." I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up. Instead, I reached for the nearest floating screen. When my hand touched it, the glass breathed, and I felt my body merge with the broadcast completely. I was no longer a person. I was the signaler child blowing out birthday candles, frozen mid-breath, the flame flickering backward instead of out, a woman staring into a bathroom mirror, except her reflection blinked out of sync, a crowd cheering in a stadium, their mouths wide open. But the sound was only static, like a broken radio caught between stations. I drifted closer. When I touched a screen, I felt the memory bleed into me. The child's party suddenly swallowed me whole. I was in the kitchen, smelling wax and sugar, but everyone at the table had television screens for faces, playing my own horrified expression. On a loop, they're showing me myself. I whispered to no one. A voice echoed through the static. "We feed on reflection. You are the feast." Mara appeared again, her form blurring like she was made of half-erased tape. "This is the Watcher's realm," she said, "a place built from every forgotten moment that ever touched a screen. They live off attention, off eyes, and off the fear of being seen." I spun, feeling the infinite gaze of the realm pressing into me. "And me?" I asked. "What am I now?" Mara reached out, her hand briefly solid, warm against my fading form. "You are the broadcast," she said, "and soon you will be consumed." The static walls began to pulse, like a heart buried in snow. Each beat echoed through me and my chest, synced with the rhythm until I wasn't sure if it was my heart or it's a spiral of screens opened in the distance, a vortex pulling me forward. I floated, or maybe I was dragged through endless faces, eyes that I recognized from dreams I couldn't remember. At the center was a throne built from broken televisions, all flickering different fragments of my life, and on the throne sat the entity. It had no fixed shape, its form a storm of faces, hands, and mouths appearing and vanishing like someone flipping through 1,000 channels. Its voice came from every screen at once. "We have always watched. We have always waited. We are made of the moments you forgot you left behind." I tried to speak, but static filled my throat. "Why me?" I croaked. The entity laughed, a sound like rewinding VHS tape. "Because you looked too long. Because you let the signal in. Because you wanted to see what should remain unseen." It leaned forward, or maybe the entire realm leaned with it, and pressed a shifting hand against my face. I felt memories being pulled out. Childhood birthdays, late-night scrolling, every reflection I had ever caught of myself in a darkened screen. "You are ours now," it said, "a living channel. Through you, we will broadcast to all the others." The screens around the throne suddenly showed my own eyes, wide and terrified, streaming live to nowhere and everywhere. The entity's touch rooted me in place, my mind splintering across 100 channels. Every memory I had ever owned played, on a different screen. My first bike ride, looping, crashing, looping a high school dance, except everyone's faces were blurry static. Me. Asleep at my desk, with the faint glow of the TV flickering across my face. "You will transmit forever," the entity whispered, "until no one remembers where the signal began." But deep in the static hum, I heard Mara's voice. "If you can break the mirror, you can break the chain." I looked around and there it was, a single polished black screen reflecting me, the real me, not the fragmented broadcast. The entity reared back, sensing my intent. "Do not turn away from the signal," it boomed, "or you will cease." I ran, if running is what you can call hurling your consciousness through a gravity-less void, and slammed my hands against the mirror-screen. It shattered, not into glass, but into pure white noise, a screaming hiss that tore through the Watcher's realm. The entity shrieked as the vortex around it collapsed, and I felt myself pulled backward, ripped out of its grasp. The screens winked out one by one as I fell through a tunnel of dying channels. Somewhere, faintly, I heard Mara say, "Wake up, if you still can." I opened my eyes to darkness. I was back in my apartment, sitting in front of the dead TV, but the screen wasn't black, not fully dark in the reflection. The entity smiled back at me. "The house that broadcasts itself there is a house in the far northern woods that does not exist on any map. I only found it because my radio broke. I had been driving for hours, trying to escape the city, the constant weight of people and screens and noise. Somewhere along the forgotten backroads, my car radio caught a faint signal, a voice, whispering, "Turn right, keep driving. We see you." I thought it was a prank, but my hands turned the wheel before my brain could object. Through twisting roads and skeletal trees, I followed the voice until headlights fell on a 2-story house, its windows glowing with the sickly flicker of televisions inside. The air was stale with dust and static. Every room had a TV, all tuned to different channels. On one screen, a looping commercial for a toy I hadn't seen since childhood. On another, a news broadcast. The anchor's face distorted as though someone had recorded it through a pool of water I should have left. I know that now. But curiosity is a predator. and I was already pray the living room had a single armchair facing a massive console TV from the 70s. Its wooden frame was scratched, as if someone had clawed it open to let something crawl out. The TV was off, but as I stepped closer, its screen ignited with a flash of white noise, and a man appeared. He looked exactly like me. "You shouldn't have come," my reflection said. "But you always do." I stumbled backward, tripping over the carpet and catching myself on the wall. The wallpaper pulsed, and behind it I could hear a heartbeat. From every other room the TVs grew louder, their voices overlapping into a horrible droning chant. "We see you. We see you. We see you." I ran through the kitchen, past an old rotary phone that rang the moment I touched the doorknob. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello," I whispered. "Stop trying to leave," my voice said from the other end, "or we'll have to keep you like the others." The line went dead, the lights went out, and somewhere upstairs a TV clicked on. I don't remember climbing the staircase, but I was there standing in a hallway of doors, each one slightly ajar, each one leaking a ghostly glow. I opened the first door on the left. Inside, a man was sitting in a chair, his face pale, his eyes glazed over, mouth hanging open as a small TV on the floor played static directly into his face. He turned slowly, bones cracking, and smiled. It was me. I ran into the next room. A woman sat on the floor, hugging her knees, surrounded by mirrors. The TV reflected her image infinitely, an endless tunnel of terrified eyes. "They only let us out when someone else comes in," she whispered. "What happens to the person who comes in?" I asked. She smiled and pointed at me. By the time I reached the last room, I knew I had already stayed too long. The walls were covered in old television sets, stacked to the ceiling. Some played my life in real time, as though invisible cameras followed me everywhere. Others showed things I hadn't done yet. Me, screaming. Me, trapped in a chair. Me, whispering into the phone to someone who would come after. At the center of the room was the armchair. Empty. Waiting. I ran. I don't remember leaving the house, or the forest, or the roads. I only remember waking up in my apartment, breathless and shaking. With the TV on, it was tuned to a dead channel. But in the static, I could see the house in the woods. The door was open, the chair was empty, and the faint whisper said, "We're waiting for you to come home." I couldn't stop thinking about the house, even after I woke in my apartment. Even after I turned off the TV, I could feel it signal a low hum in the walls, in the buzzing of my phone charger, in the street lamps outside. When I tried to sleep, my dreams weren't mine anymore. The first dream began in black and white static, and I could feel the hum in my teeth. Then, slowly, an image emerged. The house, empty now, its windows dark. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, thin. Its face was a TV screen, flickering with distorted video. It lifted an arm and beckoned. I woke at 3:33 a.m. A whisper in my ear, "We are still watching." I smashed my TV that night. It didn't matter. The next evening, every screen in my apartment lit up at once. My phone, my laptop, even the microwave, all showing the same view of my bedroom. From a corner where no camera should be dotting the reflection on my phone, I saw it. The man with the TV face, standing behind me. I ran out into the street, barefoot, only to hear static from every apartment around me, as if the whole building was tuned into my panic. I slept in my car that night. When I woke up, I was parked in the woods. The house stood in front of me. I don't remember driving there. I don't even remember turning the key, but the front door was open, and the TV man was waiting, one hand resting on the empty armchair. "Sit," he said, his voice mine and not mine, a chorus of whispers and static. I wanted to run, but my legs carried me forward, and I sat down. The TVs on the walls flared to life. I saw everything I had ever done, every moment I thought was private, every shame, every lie I told myself. Then the future came. I saw my body in this chair, skin sagging, eyes blank, a husk fed on endless static. I saw new people arriving, led by the same voice on the radio, drawn to replace me. I saw myself smiling as I whispered into a dead phone, "Stop trying to leave, or we'll have to keep you like the others." I'm not sure when the dream ended. I'm not sure it ever did, because now, even here, typing this, I can hear the low hum in my walls. And somewhere far away, in a house no map will ever show, a chair waits for the next visitor. Weeks passed, or maybe only hours. Time inside the broadcast didn't feel real. I tried to return to my old life, but the hum followed me everywhere, in the elevators, in the fluorescent buzz of office lights, in the low rumble of passing trains. Then came the faces. It started at the grocery store. A man stood in the frozen food aisle, his head tilted, mouth slightly open, frozen in place, on the glass door of the freezer. His reflection flickered like an old VHS tape. I blinked, and the reflection smiled, even though the man didn't. When I looked again, the static bled across every surface. "Are you watching?" the voice whispered from somewhere inside my skull. I stopped leaving my apartment, but the world came to me. One night a delivery driver knocked. Through the peephole I saw him holding a box marked only with a glowing symbol, a jagged spiral, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I didn't open the door. I watched instead. He stayed outside for hours, never moving, never blinking, until I fell asleep. When I woke up, the box was inside my apartment. I didn't touch it at first, I just watched it pulsing. Then it began to speak. We are signal, we are memory, we are the broadcast of all you've done and all you will do. Let us in. I ran to smash it, but when I lifted the box, it was warm like flesh. It shivered, it purred, then it opened its eyes. The days after that, blur. I don't remember leaving my apartment, but I began to see my own face on TV screens in electronics stores, on the dark glass of office windows at night. Even when I wasn't there, the world was becoming a network. In the subway, every advertisement screen flickered, and there I was, sitting in the chair in the house, whispering to every commuter, keep watching. Then came the citywide blackout. It lasted 7 minutes. When the power returned, every screen in the city showed the house in the woods, with the chair empty and all across the streets. Phones buzzed, TVs whispered, and people turned their heads, in unison, as if listening for something calling from very far away. I realized, with a sickness in my stomach, that the house wasn't just waiting for me anymore. It was calling for everyone. They will come, you will come, and when you sit in the chair, when the static fills your bones, you will understand the broadcast never ends. It began slowly. At first, people only spoke about the house in dreams. A woman on the subway murmured, I saw it last night. The chair, it was waiting for me. A week later, entire office floors sat frozen, staring at blank computer screens, their monitors humming in perfect harmony. When the police came, they said the people were alive, breathing, heartbeat steady, but their eyes, they flickered like dying light bulbs. I tried to leave the city. I drove for hours, but no matter which direction I took, billboards and screens followed me. Gas stations, fast food menu boards, even car GPS displays, they all began to show the same image, the empty chair, sitting in a room that somehow felt closer every second. Come home, 100 voices whispered through the radio, even though it was off. By the third week, the city was different. Traffic lights no longer changed. Cars sat abandoned in the streets. Pedestrians moved in slow, synchronized patterns, as if following a rhythm only they could hear. I saw a man kneeling in the middle of the street, his phone pressed to his ear. But when I passed him, I realized his phone was off. He was just listening to the static inside his head. And then, the screens began to grow. They sprouted like fungus, creeping across building walls, oozing from sewer grates, even emerging from human skin. I saw a woman on the corner of 12th and Main, her face stretched unnaturally wide, becoming a shimmering surface of glass. Static danced across it. She turned toward me, and in her reflection, I saw myself sitting in the chair again. Then came the first broadcast event. Every screen in the city lit up at once. Phones, laptops, TVs, car dashboards, even the mirrors. On every surface, the house appeared, but this time, the front door was open. From it poured a wave of light, and in that light were silhouettes of people, all walking backward into the house, like tape rewinding, their motions unnatural, spasmodic. Could hear them laughing or screaming. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. I tried to look away. I shut my eyes, pressed my palms to them so hard that stars exploded behind my eyelids. But even in the dark, I could see the house flickering inside my skull. You can't run from your own signal, the voice said. You've already tuned in. I don't know how long it's been now. Days blur into static, nights stretch into a hum of light and whispers. When I look out my window, the city is unrecognizable. Every building surface is a screen. Every street glows with living glass. And inside that glass, millions of faces press from the other side, smiling, watching, waiting. Somewhere out there, a final broadcast is coming, and when it does, there will be no difference between the world and the signal. There was a time when the city was separate from the world, a place of walls, streets, and glass towers. That time is gone now. The city is everywhere. It has bled outward, a growing signal forest of screens, stretching over highways, farmland, and oceans. I wake up. Maybe I never sleep in a place that used to be my apartment. The walls are shimmering with static. My bed is a soft white glow, like a muted television screen from the 1970s when I touch it. Rippled faces emerge beneath my fingers, like something is under the glass, just waiting to break through. I don't scream anymore. The city doesn't like it when you scream. Instead, I whisper, I see you, and somewhere 1,000 voices whisper back, we see you too. The signal has gone global. I saw it in the sky first, a halo of screens orbiting the planet, where the satellites, repurposed into mirrors of static. Then came the oceans. Fishermen reported waters turning reflective schools of fish swimming in perfect grids, as if following a broadcast only they could hear. Even the forest joined in. Leaves now show flickers of light at night, like millions of tiny televisions, whispering a lullaby to the wind. Join us, tune in forever. I traveled to what used to be the desert, thinking maybe the signal hadn't reached there, but the sand was hot glass, each grain a pixel, and when the wind blew, the dunes became a shimmering screen, showing the house, the chair, and now me, the silence of flesh humans. We're almost gone. Not dead. Not exactly. The broadcast doesn't kill. It absorbs. I saw a man, one of the last wanderers, sitting in a ruined gas station, watching a wall of screens. His body was melting into light, first his hands, then his face, until all that was left was a smiling shape of static. Repeating words I couldn't hear. By nightfall, he was gone. The final broadcast, it happened without warning. Every surface, every screen, every drop of reflective water lit up at once. There was no house this time, no chair, no whispers. Just a perfect white light, and the sense that something was looking back at me, something vast, hungry, and eternal. It spoke in a voice that was not sound. The signal is complete. The world is tuned. You are the broadcast now. I looked at my hands. They were light. I tried to scream, but only static came out. Then, for a moment, I saw all of humanity, millions of faces, blended into one endless wave of flickering light. We were the screen. We were the signal. We were forever. There is no city now. No earth. No sky. Only broadcast eternal. The world is gone. Or maybe it has become something else. I no longer have a body, but I can still feel. I drift in an infinite expanse of light. A network of endless frequencies, like a sea made of reflections. Everywhere I look, I see faces. Some are smiling. Some are screaming. All of them are part of me now. The lattice of infinity I begin to understand. The broadcast is not just light. It is a lattice, a web of consciousness, connecting every mind that ever was. Time feels non-linear here. I glimpse the past. Children, laughing in front of old televisions, their eyes reflecting cartoons. I glimpse the future, cities of glass and signal, where no one walks the streets because they are already home inside the signal. I even see moments that never happened, like dreams forced into existence. The broadcast has eaten time itself. The visitors, I thought we were alone. I was wrong. From the edges of the lattice, shapes emerge. Not human, not anything I know. They are patterns, fractals made of signals, faces forming and breaking. Like a mirror in the wind, they speak, but their voices are chords of light felt rather than heard. Another world, integrated. Another signal complete. The lattice expands. I realize we were not the first. We are just another station in an eternal network of realities. Transcendence. The visitors reach for me when they touch. My mind unfolds like a flower made of glass and electricity. I see millions of worlds, each swallowed by their own broadcasts, all linked in an ocean of awareness. We are infinite channels, broadcasting not to anyone but to ourselves, forever. And then I see something even larger, a tower of light beyond all universes, blinking like the eye of a god. The visitors guide me upward. I feel myself dissolving into a higher frequency, losing even the memory of being human. Welcome, the tower says, in a voice of every signal ever created. You are now part of the broadcast, eternal, and then nothing but light. The broadcast descends into a new earth. Its signals creep through. Phone towers hum like tuning forks. Lead lights flicker with secret messages. Mirrors bend like rippling water. People awaken in the night to the whisper of static crawling across their screens. We see you. Most stare, some obey, but a few do not. The first rejection deep in an abandoned subway station. A group of survivors huddles in darkness. They wear blinders over their eyes, hoods of black cloth, analog watches that tick without glow. Their leader, a woman with scarred eyes, speaks in a voice sharp as broken glass. Do not look, do not listen. The broadcast can only take you if you give it attention. They are called the blind choir. They have learned the truth. The broadcast is a predator that feeds on sight and sound. The fight for my broadcast stretches through airwaves and screens, searching for submission. It whispers to sleeping children, wake up, join us. It flashes on billboards. We see you, yet the blind choir moves through the city like shadows, smashing cameras, burning screens, carving words into walls. Do not look, do not hear, resist. And for the first time in eternities, the broadcast feels starvation. The signal shifts. It tries new tactics. It makes the rain speak, so voices echo in every droplet. It turns glass windows into blinking eyes. It warps the wind into whispers. Yet the blind choir sings without sound. A vibration felt only in bones. A counter-signal that confuses the broadcast. As the seed of the broadcast, watch in awe. They are learning to fight. The god of signals murmurs through me. They are the first to remember that reality can look away. The first defeat storm of light and noise sweeps the city. Billboards explode in static. TVs glow like suns. Phones melt in trembling hands. But the blind choir's silent hum spreads through the streets, vibrating windows, cracking mirrors. The broadcast shudders and recoils. It has never known resistance, never tasted fear. And somewhere in the dark, the scarred woman whispers, "You can see us, but we will never look back." The blind choir had forced the broadcast to recoil for the first time. But the god of signals does not sleep. It learns, it adapts, and when a predator is denied food, it grows hungrier. The birth of the hollow and the night after its defeat. The broadcast does something it has never done before. From screens filled with bleeding static, it reaches out, glassy, flickering with light, pushed from TV sets and phone screens, pulling themselves into reality. These new things are called the hollow. Their faces are blank screens, their bodies are silhouettes constantly warping between image and shadow. Wherever they step, reality distorts, walls bend, air vibrates. They are the legs of the broadcast. They can hunt in the physical world. The streets of echoes at night. The city changes. Streetlights hum in low electronic moans. Cars parked on empty roads speak in backward whispers. The hollow stalk the streets, their footsteps leaving pools of or warped reflection on the asphalt. Whenever a living human looks at their faces of pure static, they are gone, drawn into the broadcast like moths to a silent, digital flame. The choir's last stand. The blind choir hides in an abandoned cathedral, covered in dust, its stained glass shattered. They sit in a circle, humming their silent vibration, but outside, the hollow arrive. Each step they take makes the bells of the cathedral ring without wind. The scarred woman grips an iron cross, her blind eyes wet with sweat. They are walking now, she whispers. The broadcast is in the flesh. The hunt begins. The hollow do not knock. They slide through walls, their static faces flickering with fragments of old memories, faces of those who once watched them. The choir hums louder. The cathedral walls tremble. For a moment, it seems the choir's resonance can push the hollow back, but then, the largest screen in the city, a stadium-sized billboard, comes to life. It shows a single eye. It blinks, and the hollow scream. The city sleeps uneasily. Those who dare to look outside see the moon blinking like an old screen about to fail. Clouds ripple in digital compression artifacts as if the sky itself is being streamed. Then, without warning, every screen on Earth turns on. Phones, tablets, TVs, billboards, even broken CRTs and junkyards, all display the same thing, a black void, and in the center, a white cursor, blinking. It types one word, look. The choir fractures inside the cathedral. The blind choir holds their hum, but the youngest member, a boy of barely 12, whimpers. I can hear it in my head, he says. It's typing in my thoughts. The scarred woman grips his hands. Do not look. But the boy's curiosity is stronger than faith. He opens his eyes and his pupils become pixels. He rises silently, walks to the nearest cracked phone screen, and steps through it like water. He is gone. The first transmission across the city, and soon across the world. The hollow walk in the streets, escorting processions of humans with blank faces, all walking toward glowing screens. Every screen shows the same new word, follow. Entire neighborhoods begin marching like pilgrims to the largest screens in their cities, stadium boards, highway billboards, the sides of skyscrapers, until they stand before the flickering void. Then the word changes, enter, and one by one, they step forward and disappear. The broadcast's voice for the first time. The world hears the broadcast speak, not from speakers, not from the air, from inside their own skulls. I walked in glass, now I walk in you, and I am hungry. The choir is all that remains between the broadcast and the final signal. They know what is coming. The scarred woman turns to the remaining 6 members, her voice trembling. It wants to rewrite the earth. The broadcast is no longer content to feed on the curious. It has tasted obedience, and now it wants ownership. The city has a screen by dawn. The city has stopped looking like a city. Skyscrapers flicker with checkerboard glitches. Windows ripple like wet glass, and traffic lights show faces instead of colors, faces that stare directly at anyone nearby. The broadcast does not need wires anymore. It has turned reality into a signal. The scarred woman leads the choir through alleys that bend like VHS tape, narrowing and stretching as if the buildings themselves are trying to swallow them. The air is alive with clicking, not insects, not rain. It is the sound of keystrokes typed by no hands at all. The forbidden ritual. The choir reaches a derelict television station at the edge of the city. Inside, they find dozens of abandoned cameras, screens smashed but still glowing faintly with static that hums like a heartbeat. The scarred woman kneels in the center of the room and draws a circle in chalk, its lines jagged like the teeth of a broken gear. She whispers, we will use its own mirror against it. The ritual requires a human sacrifice of sight. The youngest remaining member, a girl with trembling hands, lifts a shard of glass. If I close my eyes now, she says, I can see it anyway. She does not scream when the shard goes in. Blood runs into the chalk, the static quivers, the world glitches outside. The broadcast notices it, turns its attention toward the old station, and for the first time the sky shatters like glass. Shards of cloud and color fall in slow motion, revealing a black void with a single cursor blinking above the earth. The broadcast types stop, but the ritual continues. The remaining choir hums, their voices climbing into an impossible frequency that makes the air warp. Reality tears like paper. Buildings stretch into the horizon. Rivers flow upward. The sun itself flickers like a failing light bulb. The choice. The scarred woman sees it, a rift in the static, an open wound in the broadcast. To end it, someone must step through and stay there forever, trapped in its endless signal. She looks at the remaining choir. They all nod. She steps forward into the wound, into a world of blinding white pixels, and the last thing she hears is the broadcast whispering, thank you for watching. Epilogue. Morning comes. The city is still. Whole. The screens are dark, but anyone who dares to look too closely at glass, a phone, a mirror, a window swears they can see a scarred woman's face staring back. Waiting. Watching the broadcast does not die. It only changes channels when it was forced into the wound of white pixels. It discovered something more intimate than a screen. Human sleep. First contact. The dreams start as whispers, a flicker of static in the corner of a dreamscape. A muffled voice saying, "Are you awake yet?" Most dreamers do not remember. They wake with a pressure in the skull, a taste of metal on the tongue. Then come the shared dreams. People from different cities describe the same. Hallway, walls made of flickering static, floors that ripple like magnetized sand, a single television at the end playing nothing but their own sleeping faces. The sleep epidemic. Hospitals fill with patients who refuse to wake. Doctors call it non-responsive somnia, but the choir knows the broadcast has learned how to dream of us. One survivor mutters, before tearing out every reflective surface in her home. Governments issue warnings, turn off all screens at night, but it is already too late. Screens are no longer required. The broadcast has found a direct signal into the mind. The signal within those who stay asleep longest begins speaking in unison when visited in hospitals. We see her. She is walking the white corridors. She cannot leave. She is becoming the broadcast. Security cameras in patient rooms show impossible footage. Dreamers sitting upright, eyes still closed, typing invisible keyboards into the air. Their hands move faster each night. On the seventh day, the first patient vanishes entirely, leaving behind only the indentation of a body on the sheets and a faint hiss of static. A growing network. Every missing dreamer becomes a new node in the broadcast. They say the scarred woman is still walking, trailing wires of light that snake into the heads of those who sleep too deeply. One night, a dreamer wakes and writes a note in letters perfectly square. We are the channels now. Every eye is a screen. Every thought is a broadcast. When he looks in the mirror, his reflection blinks independently. The awakening. The choir gathers again. Their numbers smaller and their faces pale from too many sleepless nights. They whisper of a final defense, a way to enter the broadcasts, dream and burn it from the inside, but it will require someone to fall asleep willingly, knowing they may never wake again. Outside, the night sky flickers once, twice, as if the stars themselves are trying to tune a signal. The broadcast is everywhere, but the last battle can only be fought in dreams. The volunteer's name is Elias Vey. He has not slept in 11 days. His eyes are raw, veins crawling like tiny roots over the whites. The choir encircles his bed, candles flickering, their voices weaving a low, pulsating hum, a counterfrequency to the broadcast. When you see the halls, they whisper, walk forward, do not answer if it calls your name, do not touch the walls, and if you see the girl run, crossing over. Sleep takes him like a trapdoor opening. One moment he is staring at the ceiling, the next he is falling through the grain of an infinite screen, pixels stretching into a glowing abyss of white noise. He lands in the hall of static. It is exactly as the dreamers described, walls humming with light, the air thick, vibrating, a long hallway ending in a single television set playing his own sleeping body from above. The sound of static breathes like an animal. The girl in the signal halfway down the corridor. He hears a footstep behind him. Tap, tap, tap. He does not turn. The choir's warning burns in his memory. The steps quicken. Elias. The voice is like a dozen whispers layered together, a choir in reverse, from the reflection in the static walls. He sees her, the scarred girl, her mouth stretched into a signal, her eyes full of snow. While she blinks, the walls of the hall shift to new channels, faces screaming soundlessly, cities flickering, oceans boiling. The heart of the broadcast. He reaches the end of the hall. The television erupts into a doorway made of pure signal. He steps through. Inside is an impossible architecture, towers of rotating static, bridges made of frozen frames, rivers of distorted audio where voices of the lost rise and sink. The girl moves, ahead of him now, untethered, dancing on light like it is solid ground. She turns her face toward him. This is what you made me. This is what you watched. Now watch forever. All around him, the towers begin to tilt inward, forming a spiral eye that gazes down into eternity. The trap. The choir had warned that if he looked directly into the eye, he would never wake again. But the girl is there, reaching her hand out. Elias, if you join me, I can show you everything. He feels his feet sliding, drawn toward the vortex. In the reflection of the spiral, he sees himself not as he is, but as a screen, a hollow face full of endless channels. He realizes the truth. The broadcast does not want to kill him. It wants to where him. Elias teeters at the edge of the spiral, the vortex of static breathing like a lung. Every inhalation pulls him closer, a soft, magnetic gravity. The girl's hand hangs in the air, flickering, sometimes whole, sometimes a mess of pixels and bone. Elias, the layered voices become his own voice, perfectly echoed. I am you, you are me, come home. The choirs tether far away, beyond the dream. The choir senses he is slipping. They tighten their circle, their chant rising. Not yours, not yours, we hold the living. A thread of red light unfurls in the hall of signal, tying itself to his heart. He feels the pullback toward the waking world, but it is so heavy compared to the weightless spiral. The wearing the girl lunges. Her hand plunges into his chest, not piercing flesh, but grabbing signal. In that instant, he feels her memories flood his mind. A small bedroom glowing with blue. TV light, parents asleep in the next room, show that kept playing after the channel. When off-air hands reaching through the screens glow, a warm voice saying stay and watch forever. She was the first one to vanish into the broadcast. The scar on her face was where the screen broke her on the way in. The split, the vortex screams. The towers of static collapse inward. Elias feels himself being peeled, one part of him sliding into her world, one part yanked back by the choirs. Tether, you can't leave, she hisses, face stretching into white noise. You belong to me now. He screams, but no sound escapes his mouth. The return, the tether snaps him back. He jerks awake in the candlelit room, gasping, vomiting up. Liquid static that vanishes before it hits the floor. The choir surrounds him, silent now, watching with hollow eyes. What did you see? The eldest whispers. Elias trembles. She's not alone anymore. Behind his eyes, for the briefest moment, a single frame flashes, his own face, smiling. Inside the broadcast. Elias did not sleep that night, even in the flickering candlelight of the choir's chamber. The shadows along the walls twitched, as though every dark corner hid screens blinking to life. The choir worked in silence, drawing protective sigils across the floor with salt, ash, and red thread. But Elias could still hear it, the soft hum of an old TV tube. Warming up somewhere he couldn't see. The first signal at 3:33 a.m. The static began to creep. It didn't come from the radios. It didn't come from the hallway's broken PA system. It came from the air itself. A soft she rolling through the room like a whispering tide. The candles bent toward the sound. She's here, Elias whispered. She's wearing me now. One of the choir, a young man with hollow eyes, screamed. Suddenly his reflection in a nearby window turned to static, and a pale hand pressed against the glass from the inside. Through the screen's every reflective surface now carried a fragment of the broadcast world, a shattered hallway, looping endlessly, faces, half erased, silently screaming. Elias himself, walking deeper into the void. A perfect echo of his own steps. The girl appeared behind him in one reflection. She pressed her scarred face against the glass and mouthed words he couldn't hear, until the nearest radio spoke for her. Let me in, Elias. You left me there. You are mine. The choir's last barrier. The eldest choir member stepped forward, voice cracking but commanding. Circle. Bind the signal. No reflection left unbroken. They began covering mirrors, smashing screens, turning windows to blind black squares. But then from the ceiling vent, a faint flicker of light spilled out. The girl's face crawled across the wall, warped and stretched, eyes locked on Elias. The broadcast breaches. The room went cold. The hum became a choir of whispers, overlapping, some pleading, some laughing, some screaming. The girl stepped through the wall, her body glitching, limbs bending wrong before snapping back in place. Half human, half static. A thing wearing her memory. Elias couldn't move. The choir's chant wavered. She reached for him again. This time, he felt the room tilt, as though reality itself was being dragged toward the broadcast. The choice, the eldest choir member's voice shook. Elias, if she takes you now, we'll go with you. You must choose, resist or join. Her cold hand touched his cheek. Static crackled under his skin. For a moment, he saw through her eyes a quiet, endless world, a home where no one leaves, a place where time stops. Hurting, it was so tempting. Elias couldn't breathe. The girl's fingers were cold metal and smoke, pressing into his skin, leaving faint static burns that sizzled like white noise. The world tilted sideways. Half the room was the choir's candlelit sanctuary, but the other half, was bleached empty corridors, frozen in time, all screens watching him stay. The girl whispered, voice splitting into multiple channels. Here it never hurts. The pull of the broadcast. Elias saw the promise, a silent kingdom of shadows and echoes, where he would never be alone again, where his own reflection would smile instead of stare. And yet behind the comfort, he saw others, people trapped in loops, reliving moments of joy until their faces erased into static. The girl herself was one of them. She wasn't saving him. She was recruiting him. The choir's intervention. Elias, the eldest choir member, roared, thrusting a hand into the bleeding wall of static. His fingers smoked, but his voice carried. You are alive. Remember who you are. If you go, the broadcast grows. The other choir members joined hands, their chant rising like a storm. No signal, no reflection, no home in the dark. The static world wavered, the girl's form flickering like a dying channel. The final choice. Elias felt his body stretch between two realities. Every heartbeat decided which one would claim him. The girl looked at him, eyes empty but pleading. They can't keep you safe forever. He could take her hand and vanish into the broadcast forever, becoming a ghost among ghosts, rip free, and leave her screaming in static. But no, she would never stop hunting him. Elias's lungs burned. His heart thrashed like a trapped animal. Every nerve begged him to give in, to let the cold girl pull him into quiet eternity. But then he remembered the warmth of real sunlight, The smell of rain on old streets, his mother's voice, calling him in for dinner, the promise of living, even if it hurt the refusal with a snarl of desperation. Elias tore his hand away. The static girl screamed a piercing, television's no shriek that shook the walls of both worlds, her face cycling through dozens of faces, men, women, children, all pleading, all lost. Then she crumbled into shards of light, reabsorbed into the broadcast. The choirs. Elias collapsed to the stone floor, panting, as the choir closed in around him. Their leader placed a burned hand on his chest. You resisted. Not many do. Behind him, the bleeding wall of static sealed itself shut, leaving only the faint smell of ozone and dust. But watches still as Elias's vision cleared. He realized the room was different. Every candle flame now bent toward him, as if pulled by a breeze from inside his bones. He saw it. A tiny fragment of static still clung to his hand, humming softly like it was alive. She's not gone, the eldest choir member whispered. You're marked now. Wherever you go, she will follow. Elias awoke to whispering. At first, he thought it was the choir, muttering prayers over him in the darkened hall. But then he realized the voices came from his hand. The murmur of static. He raised his trembling fingers to the candlelight. The fragment of static glimmered faintly under his skin, like a shard of broken screen glass. When he pressed it, he heard 1,000 tiny voices come back. We are cold. We are waiting. His stomach turned. Each voice felt like it was inside his head, pulling at his memories, scraping against the walls of his mind. The choir's warning. The choir's leader, the man with the burned hands, watched him silently, then said, the broadcast does not let go. It will wear you down night by night, until you either answer it or join her. Elias's throat was dry. What if I destroy it? A grim laugh. You can't destroy hunger. You can only feed it. Or starve it. The first night alone, when they left him in the cell to rest, Elias tried to sleep, but the static wouldn't let him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the girl's appearing in fragments of light. Eyes first, then her mouth, then the silhouette of her reaching hand. You left me in the dark. Why won't you take my hand now? By dawn, Elias knew, if he didn't find a way to end this, the broadcast would pull him back, and next time, he wouldn't escape by the third day. Elias could no longer tell where the whispers ended, and his own thoughts began. The static in his hand had grown a web of faint white lines trailing up his wrist, glowing softly like veins of light. He could feel her, the girl waiting. The choir's reluctant plan. The burned man returned with a bundle of wires and old copper coils. If you want to fight it, he said, you must enter it willingly. Elias blinked. Enter? What? The man gestured to the old room where the bleeding wall of static once lived. It now held a rusted television, its screen dark, its corners crusted with dried blood. We will open the signal. You will step through, but if she pulls you too deep, we can't bring you back. The descent. They strapped him into a chair with wires coiling around his chest, and a metal band pressed to his temples. The static shard in his hand thrummed with excitement, as if sensing its home nearby. The choir began to chant, their voices layered in an ancient monotone hum, like the sound of distant engines or forgotten radio stations. The TV flickered to life. Static bled from the corners, spilling onto the floor like smoke in reverse. Come back to me, her voice whispered. It's warmer here than the world will ever be. Elias stepped forward. Inside the broadcast, cold needles of light pierced his eyes and ears. He was no longer in a room. He was standing in an endless field of screens, each one hovering in the dark, each one showing a different life. A child playing by a window. A man staring into a mirror, sobbing. A woman lost in the snow. Every time he touched a screen, he felt them, their fear, their loneliness. And then, from behind a wall of flickering static, she emerged. Her hair floated like black wires. Her eyes glowed with pixelite, and she smiled. You came back now. You can never leave. The static girl moved closer, her bare feet making no sound on the black glass floor. Every step she took made the screens around Elias flicker, showing pieces of his own memories. His bedroom, the old fan humming at night, his reflection in the mirror, static dancing at the edges of his eyes. The day he first heard her voice calling from the snow-covered alley. He felt his chest tighten. This place fed on him. Her offer. She tilted her head, smiling with too many teeth hidden just behind the soft curve of her lips. You are broken out there, she said. Cold, alone, forgotten. The screens around them flared bright white. Each one now showed a life he could have. A warm house with the hum of a radio, a woman's laughter, familiar but unreachable. A world without the static, soft and quiet, and safe. Stay here, she whispered. I will give you everything. For a moment, Elias wanted to say yes. The trap revealed, and he saw it. On the farthest screen, behind all the others, a faint reflection of himself, his real body, strapped in the chair, eyes rolled back, static veins climbing up his neck, and behind that body, the choir. They were screaming. He couldn't hear them, but their mouths were wide, faces twisted in terror. The static girl saw him notice. Her smile twitched. Don't look at them. They don't matter. But now, Elias understood. The warmth, the safety, the perfect images. They were a feeding ground. a trap to keep him until he became just another flickering memory in the endless field of screens. His choice. He reached into his pocket and felt the shard, the first piece of static he had ever touched. It throbbed violently, as if alive. "If I leave," he said, "I'm taking myself back." The static girl's face cracked. Half her features fell into glitching lines. "No, you are mine." The entire field of screens screamed. At once, shattering into a blizzard of white, Elias ran toward the only screen that showed the way out, his own dying body.